Also, before we begin, I want to apologize to somebody last year. I don't know if he's here this year, but last year somebody came up and said, hey, that video you share, I don't think it's satellite. He said, I've worked on satellite video before, and it doesn't look like anything consistent with satellite that I've seen. So apologies to that person, because in the last year, what we found out was that one of the MH370 videos isn't satellite at all. It's something called wide area motion imagery, also known as Gorgon stare in the Air Force. And it's meant to look like satellite imagery. So apologies to that person. And I just want to point out that if you've been following my investigation for the last couple of years, it's been an active investigation of trying to understand stuff that I had no basis for before all of this, from a military surveillance perspective to zero-point energy, gone from somebody who is a healthcare IT consultant to now somebody who's trying to spread the awareness about fundamental understanding of our reality and of our universe. So thank you all for being here once again and listening. I think that everybody being here and sharing this information is very important for disclosure. Okay, I think we'll just, should we wait here for him to go or just get going? I think I'm just going to get started, actually. If he jumps in, that's fine. Okay, guys. Presentation today is on zero-point energy. First question you may have is, what is zero-point energy, actually? So I've got some videos queued up here. These are all from my Twitter account. So if you guys want to check stuff out on my Twitter account after this, you can find all the stuff that I'm presenting here. The clips, the videos from the engineers, and the scientific papers. This is Paul Siz. Paul Siz is a Black Project engineer that worked on Hypersonics. We're going to actually review a couple of his scientific papers later on. And here he is back in the 2000s explaining zero-point energy. Whoops.
What that means is that when everything comes down to rest, there's still energy left. It's like sea level in the ocean. And there is a constant flow of energy between matter and antimatter as it annihilates itself and recreates itself. It occurs in stars. All of these big star factories you see now with Hubble is a continual exchange of energy. And although the average is zero, that zero may be a pretty high level above nothing at all. And what Sakharov and some of the physicists said is that it's this level that creates the background for the universe to exist. You know, there are people who have been experimenting with zero-point energy or try to tap zero-point energy for years. Every once in a while, someone will do it accidentally. They'll call it cold fusion, but I don't think it's cold fusion. I just think it's a zero-point energy tap. Except for 3 people that I know, no one has been able to control it. When it happens for a short period of time, and it's almost always destructive. It's a coupling of the device with the energy that permeates space.
So, zero-point energy, what is it? Zero-point energy is technically the ground state of space-time itself. But if you really dig into it, space-time itself is not an empty vacuum. It's a medium filled with energy. And what Paul Siz is saying there is that these virtual photons that we've been taught in physics that are popping in and out of existence all the time, that represents an ocean of energy. An ocean of energy that we're sitting on. Then the only question is, how deep is that ocean of energy? And what he was saying there is he references Sakharov from 1967. Sakharov was the first person to propose this idea that the gravity itself might be a fundamental byproduct of this zero-point energy that creates space-time. So our first scientific paper, oh, actually this is a little bit before that one, is extracting energy via the Casimir effect from Robert Forward in 1984. One of the first things people ask me is, well, yes, okay, there's this energy that permeates space-time, but we can't pull any useful electricity out of it. Well, Robert Forward would disagree. In 1984, he wrote a scientific paper that shows we can use 2 conductive plates that would normally just come together, and if we change that into a spring, then we can have our spring compress from the Casimir effect. And when the spring compresses, we can extract useful energy out of that. We can charge a battery with it. Now, the downside to this was that it's not perpetual. So when you argue with people on the internet, they'll say, well, yes, the Casimir effect shows that 2 plates come together automatically. That seems to be free energy. Where's that energy coming from? But they'll say that you can't do it again because you'd have to pull the plates apart. That requires energy to do that. So what Robert Forward was trying to do after this paper was figure out, how do I do it perpetually? So just because we have something called the Casimir effect, which we put two non-conductive plates or two conductive plates next to each other, and they will come together automatically. Just because that exists, that does show that we can extract energy, but there might be a different method for perpetual extraction of energy. And as Paul Siz said in that clip we were just watching, he says, I think cold fusion is a 0-point energy tap. So what he's saying is he's connecting this idea of cold fusion. Where does the excess energy come from in cold fusion? It comes from space-time itself. Also note, he was mentor to Eric W. Davis. You've probably seen Eric W. Davis on these UFO hearings. Robert Forward was his mentor. The next paper is The Ground State of the Hydrogen Atom by Hal Puthoff in 1987. This is Hal Puthoff's first scientific paper about 0-point energy, and I would argue he's the world's leading expert on 0-point energy, but I'm coming for the crown eventually. The question is, why is the hydrogen atom stable? Why is it we model the hydrogen atom with an electron spinning around it? Why does that electron not fly off away? Why does that electron not crash into the nucleus of the atom? Why is it stable? And the answer is because it's constantly exchanging energy with the 0-point energy field. There's constant exchange of energy coming from the 0-point energy field to that hydrogen atom and being released from it at the same time. That's why it stays stable all the time. This was a fundamental understanding of the universe that Hal Puthoff came to in 1987. The implication is clear. There is an ether of energy that we are in all the time, the same thing that Paul Siz was saying in that clip that we were just watching. Fun note, this paper was passed to me via proxy of Hal Puthoff himself when I was investigating the next paper that I'm about to show you, which is also from Hal Puthoff. The next paper that he wrote after this was Gravity is a 0-Point Fluctuation Force, 1989. Now, this is around the same time he started working with Ken Shoulders as well. And the next, we're going to talk about a little bit of connection to that. Now, what this paper shows is that 0-point energy can actually explain gravity. He references Sakharov in this paper and says Sakharov was correct. We can actually take the idea of electromagnetism, going back to Einstein's equations, and we can show that this is a consistent answer to cosmology. It doesn't just invalidate Einstein's equations, it adds to it. It says there's this extra layer of 0-point energy that explains mass, gravity, and inertia. This one's specifically about gravity. It also says that we cannot shield against gravity. Why can we not shield against gravity? Because the 0-point energy, even if I make a Faraday box, right here, you can't shield the gravity out of it because the 0-point energy is already inside when I'm making the box. That's the reason why we can't shield from it. And he also says then, well, we can explain gravity from a classical sense. We say we've got this ocean of energy, and anything we put on top of it, it bends that as well. But then we're saying, well, this 0-point energy also adds to that equation. So we could theoretically remove some of that 0-point energy, and we could take our ground state and we could lower it. This is the basis for one of Hal Puthoff's future papers about polarizable vacuum. The last bit is the Zitrabuagong. That was a word I'd never heard of a couple years ago. The Zitrabuagong is essentially the vibration of the 0-point energy all the time. So we imagine we're in this medium. We don't feel it, but it's there. I mean, we feel the air around us, we feel the water around us, but we don't really feel the 0-point energy around us. But that 0-point energy is constantly vibrating a little bit. So if we can also vibrate, then we might be able to interact with it. So really great papers that everybody should check out. Hal Puthoff seems to be the guy connected to all of this stuff. And then enter Ken Shoulders. Ken Shoulders, the big revelation from Ken Shoulders from reading his personal papers and documents is that he realized that the ether existed in 1980. He realized the ether existed. When he realized that, he said, oh, I should be able to make a stable ball of plasma if that's the case. And he did. He called them exotic vacuum objects because he believed these plasma balls must be cohering energy from the vacuum, from the 0-point energy field. He created non-equilibrium cold plasmas, which is relevant because if you watch my interviews with U.S. Navy engineer Salvatore Pais, he said that that's the secret, cold non-equilibrium plasmas. And then who was he working with? Hal Puthoff and Bill Church. It was a financier of Church's Chicken. And now here's a clip from Ken Shoulders talking about, let's close this one out. talking about teleportation and and
Things
EVO.
that can be used for.
You name something you want that's good, and it'd probably be the thing that does it for you. You say anti-gravity. Propulsion properties are just incredible. It will be able to push anything you want, anywhere you want. It enshrouds stuff. This is all written in some of these things on the web. And when it enshrouds things, it can allow them to disappear. It does make atoms disappear in laboratory work. Well, that's interesting, because when they disappear, I can transport all this stuff through somewhere else, and it reappears. That's teleportation. So it does that very nicely. It's an energy source, just incredible. We can forget all of our energy problems. We can forget all of our propulsion problems.
What's the positive things that can be?
Well, guys, I think I would say Yahtzee at that point. So Ken Shoulders right there is saying that these EVOs can teleport things. He's talking about them disappearing atoms, shrouding atoms. This is very, very similar to the idea of quantum entanglement and some of the experiments that they've been doing with Bose-Einstein condensates as well. So there's the man himself explaining these EVOs can be used for power generation. They can be used for propulsion. They can be used for what we would consider to be probably anti-gravity. But potentially unlimited applications. Now, in the early 90s, another thing came along, which was called the Marauder Project from 1993, accelerating plasma toroids, similar to spheromax, meaning that these would have created a sphere-like shape using a toroidal structure. They had multiple different applications, and how big were they? 1 meter across. 1 meter. This is a giant plasma ball. This is not just some tiny little thing that you see on some of these YouTube videos. So this whole Marauder project just goes dark, presumably because it was either too successful or I'm not exactly sure. So you can find here, I actually found one of the scientific papers from the time, compact toroidal formation, compression, and acceleration. And it's very light on details exactly what they were going to use this for. But once you started to see, balls of light floating around in the sky, you can imagine that this would be the precursor for some of these plasma ball UFO things that we're seeing. And don't worry, we have some more papers that are going to put this all together here for you guys. I just want to give you guys the timeline of, look, we're looking at the 90s now. Clearly they were interested in this concept of, spherical plasma balls. And then this paper, Force-Free Time Harmonic Plasmoids from 1992 by Jack Nechamkin. This paper is big because Jack Nechamkin was the author. He was working for the Air Force Research Labs, and the project manager is a guy that everybody needs to get familiar with named Frank Mead. Frank Mead is going to show up many, many times in these papers. The idea here was to either use vortical motion to stabilize your plasma ball. So the whole basis of this was try to manipulate the electric and magnetic fields so that you could create a stable structure. So now we're incorporating the idea of using electromagnetism in a clever way with fluid flow to manipulate the fields of your magnetic structure. And so this is like, okay, now at this point, we're looking at it and going, how can we manipulate our plasma to create our stable ball of plasma, like a drone or whatever we want to do with it, to get it to float around? Now, this paper, Extracting Energy and Heat from the Vacuum, Hal Puthoff was working on zero-point energy all through the 90s, and he was bringing in some other people. In this case, it was Daniel Cole was the person he brought in. And this paper was essentially just showing that if we extract energy from the quantum vacuum, from the ether, from the zero-point energy field, it doesn't violate the laws of thermodynamics. Now, this is huge, because when you guys start talking about free energy, everybody comes at you with the first and second law of thermodynamics. They say, energy can't be created or destroyed. That's true. Conservation is huge in physics. And then the second one they say is there's no system that can be perfectly efficient. Okay, great, but what is the workaround to both of those things? Oh, we just add an extra input. We've got our zero-point energy here. So if we're not creating energy from nothing, we're just pulling that energy from space-time itself. And with respect to our system being perfectly efficient, I don't care if our system's 90% efficient because we have an extra input of energy coming in. So even if our system's 90% efficient, we can still get more output than we have input because we have a whole nother input coming in. So this paper is really big for people to understand that when we're extracting zero-point energy, we are not violating the laws of thermodynamics. We are conceptually changing our viewpoint to allow for an extra input. And then the NASA Breakthrough Physics Propulsion, I forget what they called it, like a project or what have you. So for about 6 years, some of the smartest minds in all of physics get together. Hal Puthoff was there, Eric Davis was there, I think Sonny White was there, but I can't remember. And they talk about essentially every single UFO physics topic you could think of. We're talking about negative energy, wormholes, warp drives, extracting quantum energy. And they come up with a list of the things that are feasible and the things that aren't feasible. And they have this huge chart. I couldn't find it for the presentation, but it's out there somewhere on my Twitter. But this one is almost even better. This is the experiments that they decided had value that they should invest in afterwards. And let me just read off some of these. One of the first ones is experimental theoretical investigations into quantum vacuum energy. There you go, zero-point energy. They just use a different term for it. Next one, experimental and theoretical investigation to superluminal quantum tunneling. That's teleportation right there. Superluminal quantum tunneling. Superluminal means faster than the speed of light. The next one is EM torsion theory. So that is right there, electromagnetic torsion. And then John Kramer shows up here, which is crazy to me because we're about to watch a clip of him at the end of this. He wrote one of the DIRDs. Experimental and theoretical tests of transient inertia claims. So presumably the idea that you could reduce the amount of inertia in an object. And then RF pumped superconductors. This one surprised me because it sounded very similar to Salvatore Pais's high temperature superconductor patent. And then the last one I want to talk about there is the theoretical assessment of deep Dirac energy levels. Well, it's weird because Paul Dirac had this idea of the Dirac sea of energy. There was a negative energy that we might be living in. And that's exactly what we would need for a warp drive or a wormhole. So when I found about this, I said, okay, there was some stuff going on. Some shenanigans were going on in this where these people knew way more than whatever they were presenting to the public in this NASA Breakthrough Physics propulsion. And then Hal Puthoff gets in touch with Ruda and Heish. And essentially, they take all this idea of zero-point energy, and they clearly were working together in the 90s before this as well. And they go, not only does zero-point energy explain gravity, but it explains mass and inertia as well. So they combine all these concepts together, and they say, okay, this zero-point energy that permeates space-time, this is the reason why we weigh anything. This is why we're heavy. This is the reason why when we accelerate out in outer space, why we feel resistance. And then this is also why gravity exists as well. If I have more zero-point energy in a region and less in a different region, there's going to be a gradient. There's going to be a gradient between those, and we call that gravity. So this really brought everything full circle. And Bernard Heish as well, it's not going to be talked about here, but he has a patent with Garrett Modal called Casimir cavity patent. And it's essentially a free energy microchip. So it's clear that these guys are not just, for the people that say, oh, this is misinformation, they put this out to confuse our adversaries. No, these people absolutely believe that they can extract energy from the quantum vacuum, free energy as we would call it. Laser propulsion and the constant momentum mission. One of my favorite scientific papers that I ever found, written by Frank Mead. There he is from the Air Force Research Lab. Now, this paper is beautiful because I think anybody can understand the idea behind it. And it's essentially to make something called perfect propulsion. What they're trying to do is turn one of these plasma orbs that they've been working on into a sailboat. But it doesn't sail on the water. It sails in the sky. Sails in the sky. How do they pull that off? Well, first, a clever use of normal physics with just lift. Remember, we talked about the fluid motion of the plasma? We can use that fluid motion to create lift. And now we can have our plasma ball go in any direction that we want. But after we have that, now we want it to go in a straight line. So what this paper says is that we can essentially make perfectly efficient engine that knows exactly how much propulsion we want to push out the back in order to go to the velocity that we want. And then also takes it a step further and says, okay, in order to maximize this as well, first thing we'll do is we'll have an engagement where we have this rocket shooting out. We're going to get stuck on our target. Once we've locked in on our constant velocity, then we're going to shoot a laser in front of us, and we're just going to turn this thing into a sailboat where it's basically using no energy as it moves forward. And as we're going to see in a follow-up paper, not only does it use very little energy, but it also is accumulating energy because this ball of plasma is flying through the sky as well. So, I think that's what, oh yeah, and then also it uses a low temperature air plasma. So this is now connecting to the idea of the hypersonic designs from the Russians and the United States in the 70s. So that's, again, a non-equilibrium plasma that they use for this. The next thing I found here was Unitel. Now, chronologically, this is interesting how this fits into all of this. This is before some of these major Air Force Research Lab papers that come out right after this. And Unitel, you can find their website. I think it's Stealth Skater. You can find all this old information about all of these scientists. And it was started by a guy named Larry Maurer and Michael Miller. And the story is, I got in touch with Paul Kirsch, who was friends with them. I think these guys have passed away. And he was very close friends with them. The story is they had some kind of UFO encounter. And I haven't heard the details about it, but that they reverse engineered this idea of a macroscopic quantum teleportation protocol. The idea that we could just tunnel straight through space-time and then just appear somewhere else. And the weirdest part, we're going to watch this video in a second, was that they describe how they do this using 3 ODVs, orbiting drone vehicles. They would orbit around a cylindrical-shaped craft and then, poof, teleport it to a different location. And for me, when I heard that, I went, okay, that sounds really, really familiar, like a little too familiar. I'll let you guys judge here yourself. But now I also found, of course, like every other major project, who's connected to it? Robert Forward was talking to these guys, person we just looked at his papers. Hal Puthoff was talking to these guys. And then at least later on, Paul Kirsch actually met with Eric Davis and showed Eric Davis their scientific papers. So my opinion on this, I don't really know exactly what's going on here, but somebody's stealing information from somebody. I don't know if we're all stealing it from the aliens or if the Air Force was stealing it from these guys. But the sad story that goes along with this, before we watch this clip, is that I was told directly by Paul Kirsch that like Larry Maurer ended up dying with like broke, penniless, destitute, you know, nothing going on. And so this is a sad story that we've heard time and time again of engineers, scientists finding out about just stuff that's basically magical technology and never coming to fruition, you know, them being discredited, ignored, etc. And that's why I want to help to try to bring attention to these topics, because these people deserve more credit than they got. So here's Larry Maurer talking to Tim Ventura in 2004. And I went ahead and superimposed what you guys may recognize as the MH370 videos behind it. Once again, this is the Gorgon Stare Wide Area Motion Imagery video. In the bottom left, you can see the coordinates. That's MH370, the missing airliner. The satellite that we see in the bottom left, NROL-22, is actually a relay satellite. And how this is being recorded is via a drone that's flying up over the plane. This plane is flying very low to the ground in the video, and the drone has 2 cameras underneath the wings that's recording this. Here we go.
And also, a more interesting and recent example has been, it's always been on the electron scale in the past. They've been able to make electrons literally disappear at one point in space and reappear at another point instantaneously. But
correct.
More recently,
that's where they go across the barrier, and they don't really disappear. They go into, well, they would from our, our viewpoint, and then reappear, but they go into a higher dimension or hyperspace, if you will. And it's not any kind of magic or anything. They just go into a higher dimension and then reappear in our dimension, their 4D space-time, at another location.
Well, I think that you may gather a lot of support from an experiment done this year also, in where an entire atom was made to disappear and reappear in another location. And that really proved that it's not a single particle phenomena. As long as there's entanglement going on, the actual size and number of particles involved don't entirely matter. That entanglement is a larger phenomenon than we've granted it might be in the past.
Correct.
I also really like the concept of not just tunneling, but also falling towards a warp in space. I'm actually holding a document that I printed out today by Matt Visser, where he describes the Alcubierre drive. And in a theoretical sense, he was able to square that away with relativity theory. The concept of compressing space in front of the craft and stretching it out behind so that the craft can attain incredibly high speeds. It sounds a lot like you're going to be doing that with your design, except that possibly it's based on more of a quantum mechanics approach.
Yes, that's correct. Getting back to what you were saying about the groups of particles and an atom and that sort of thing, we've taken advantage of that in our design, whereas we can tunnel with what we call the main body vehicle, which we have to strictly adhere to the cap cone design, where we can stretch that into a cigar shape, if you will, for the main body vehicle. But at the same time, we can have the what we call the orbiting drone vehicles, or ODVs, that will orbit around the vehicle and tunnel in a bound state as one particle would, and that's what happens with atoms. You have your the nucleus with the electrons orbiting around it, traveling as one unit or in a bound state. Now, the orbiting of the ODVs around the MBV, or main body vehicle, the larger cigar-shaped vehicle, which has the payload, the personnel on board, and the various cargo that you would haul, with the lighter unmanned drones orbiting around the vehicle. They don't have to, orbit very fast. There's been a lot of tests that NASA kind of came up with, the mother-daughter satellite system in outer space that kind of takes advantage of the same thing, where you have your Exeter frequencies between the orbiting vehicles and your main body vehicle traveling as one, if you will. And what this does, Tim, is it allows us to investigate or explore dangerous areas where the main body vehicle, MBV, can sit outside in space and send in the unmanned drones to a perhaps dangerous area to explore those areas without causing any danger to anybody on board. So that's a very good feather in our hats that we're taking advantage of this bound state system, and it's something that is part of our design as well. And so, yeah, that's a very good point. And as far as compressing space, it's the same as the conditioned electromagnetic fields. We're not really compressing space. What we're doing is we're kind of opening up a bubble.
Kind of opening up a bubble. I mean, extremely specific language in terms of what we are seeing in those videos right there, talking about drones orbiting around another object, quantum tunneling. And when we talk about quantum tunneling, what quantum tunneling is we have a semiconductor or a superconductor, and then we have a barrier, also known as an insulator, and then we have another semiconductor. And what we see at these small scales is that the electrons, even though it doesn't have enough kinetic energy, it will somehow get past the barrier, even though it doesn't have the kinetic energy to hop the barrier. How does that happen? We call it quantum tunneling. So if we were to scale that up to the large scale, to the macroscopic scale, the analogy would be, what are we tunneling through as a human being or an airplane, as we saw? The answer is we're tunneling through space-time. We're tunneling through space-time itself to go from one location to another. So what are we tunneling through? Well, we're tunneling through the zero-point energy, right? The zero-point energy is what makes up space-time. So if we were somehow able to move that zero-point energy out of the way, now we've created a macroscopic quantum tunnel. And what Larry Maurer is saying there is, essentially, we're confusing the universe into thinking we're an electron. And if we're an electron, now we can zap from one location to the next. So I find Unitel to be a very interesting company. I feel like they didn't get the credit they deserve, and I'm skeptical of where was the origin of who figured out what first and who took what information from what. The fact that all these major players are connected to this company and we're investigating them tells me they were onto something. Now we get into the meat and the potatoes. Teleportation physics study by Eric W. Davis. Once again, this is for the Air Force Research Labs. Frank Mead was the project manager. And this describes the different types of teleportation. Heck, I didn't know there was this many types. There's like at least 5 or 6 types of teleportation. And it compares the sci-fi versions to the real versions, which would be an actual physical transportation or of your quantum state from one location to the other. It also even talks about psi teleportation, which is connected to the idea of remote viewing. Remote viewing. I don't think that it's a coincidence that Hal Puthoff was the world's leading expert in zero-point energy, and he has a huge history on remote viewing before this, because all of these concepts go back to the same underlying framework. All points in space and time are actually connected. We don't perceive it that way, but they must be actually connected. VM teleportation is the main form of teleportation. That's the real form of teleportation that's listed in this paper, and that connects directly to Hal Puthoff's polarizable vacuum model for how you can electrify the vacuum to change its physical properties, to change its refractive index. So the Air Force was absolutely taking teleportation seriously. This paper did get some attention when it came out in 2004, but not nearly as much as it would get now if it had been released, in 2025. And then right after this, we also have ball lightning study, another one by Eric W. Davis. This one's actually from 2003. And this is another one where Frank Mead was a project manager. This goes over formulation models of how to make a stabilized ball of plasma. It actually reviews the Jack Nachampkin 1992 paper, Force-Free Time Harmonic Plasmoids as well. It actually talks about Ken Shoulders and his EVO work in this paper. So for people wondering, were people taking Ken Shoulders' work seriously? Well, the Air Force Research Labs certainly was. Frank Mead certainly was. It talks about the different stabilization models, which I've spoken to Tom Montauk, shout out to him on Twitter, and essentially there might be 2 different forms. One could be a vortical motion that could stabilize the plasma. Another could be a squeezing stress, like a vibrational stress that could stabilize a plasma as well, which would just boil down to frequency. And then the other thing this points out is that the idea is that these plasmas must be driven by an external energy source. It's not something, there's no way that it should be able to be stable if we were in an empty vacuum. So it always points back to this idea that zero-point energy must be what's explaining these EVOs. And I was reviewing this with Bob Greenyer yesterday, and there's a huge classified portion of this paper near the end that's like actual applications for aerospace and things like that, which my guess is if we were to look at that, we would find that it's going to be hypersonic designs where they were using these engines and putting superconducting magnets on them to turn them into basically balls of plasma.
What years was that from?
This one here, 2003? You tell me, what year was it?
They were in the 50s and 60s.
50s, okay, yeah.
Classification code where it was protected was under space and aerospace.
Space and aerospace, and so as Bob just said, if you couldn't hear, it's from the 50s, the science around it, and it's about aerospace. So definitely be interested to see what the classified portions of the ball lightning study are. Also, I feel like this is just something you name your paper where like nobody in like the normie world's ever gonna read this because they're like, oh, ball lightning, what is that, And then here, this is my favorite one that I found at all, which is dense plasma focus. Or really, it's called propulsion and power generation capabilities of a dense plasma focus fusion system for future military aerospace vehicles. And who's the author? Frank Mead and George Miley. Wow, shout out to George Miley and David Froning. So these are some pretty big names in the aerospace, defense, intelligence, scientific community here. And what is this? This paper has the most incredible claims I've ever seen, actually. 2006, it says we can combine a clean, aneutronic, dense plasma focus. If you ask Hal Puthoff what is the source for a UFO's energy, he'll say aneutronic fusion and zero-point energy. That's what he'll say. And right here, we've got this saying we're going to use aneutronic, dense plasma focus fusion to power and propel this plasma orb. It's a single-staged orbit. What that means is you can just take this thing off the ground, and it's going to go straight into outer space. No boosters, nothing. This basically would just invalidate SpaceX. And it says that we can achieve a Q factor of 3. A Q factor, that's what we talk about in fusion. Q factor is 3 times over unity. If we could get a Q factor of 3, we'd already have fusion power all over the place right now. So the fact that they were even just talking about 2006, that these balls of plasma they're doing might be able to get a Q factor of 3, and it says later on, it might be able to go up as high as 3 to 6 as a Q factor. And what this can then do is it can generate gigawatts of excess energy. That's a lot, especially if it's a 1 meter plasma ball, which I think is the size of these. So these things can generate a huge amount of power. And what are they using this power for? It says right here, it says to evaluate excess power generation for communication systems, pulse-trained plasmoid weapons, ultra-high-powered lasers, and just straight-up gravity devices. Wow. Especially because this is author is Frank Mead on here. I don't think this is just them speculating. They knew exactly what they were doing here. And if I read between the lines, communication system would be a quantum communication system because it needs to be able to go through plasma. Hal Puthoff has a patent for that. The pulse-trained plasmoid weapons, I don't even want to know what that's all about. Probably pretty scary. But the ultra-high-powered lasers are probably some form of free electron laser that they can use to make like a reverse tractor beam that pulls you forward. And then the gravity devices would be what they would use to manipulate space and time to literally teleport an object from one place to the next. So that's one that everybody needs to check out, and check out these authors as well, because I think you find that a lot of their papers are really interesting. And then we jump into something that's a little more contemporary, which is the Defense Intelligence Reference Documents, the DIRDs. Now, these papers are probably the most important scientific papers to ever exist. They were commissioned by the Defense Intelligence Agency through Hal Puthoff, through his Earth Tech company. And there's only about 24 of the authors listed here. It's hard to find all the authors there. There's 38 scientific papers in total. They were essentially all written by Black Project engineers and physicists, or people that were connected to Black Project engineers and physicists. From my interpretation, it's basically like all Hal Puthoff's like buddies from the Black world, is from what I could tell. And every time I uncover a new author, I find out that there's somebody way more important than I had even realized. The idea behind it was for them to speculate what technology would look like in 2050. Like, what are we going to be at in 2050? Now, if you read between the lines, it's like, what do we have now that the public will have in 2050? Especially when we watch videos of 3 balls of plasma spinning around an airplane, disappearing out of the sky, recorded by Gorgon Stare. So here's some of my favorite papers. First is negative mass propulsion. Actually, the reason why I love this paper the most is because it's written by Friedwart Winterberg, who's a guy that should probably be famous, but he's not because he worked on so much classified stuff that everything he did is basically covered under NDAs. Can't be released to the public. But if you read his paper, it's incredible. He references Bondi, who Bondi was one of the first people to come up with this idea that negative mass could cause perpetual acceleration, so that we could create like a real warp drive by manipulating space-time itself, like we're swimming through space-time. So he references Bondi, and Friedwart Winterberg was a Project Paperclip scientist. I don't know about you guys, but I thought the Project Paperclip thing was like a conspiracy theory. It turns out it's totally real. Totally real. We literally did take scientists from Germany, what have you, and Friedrich Winterberg was one of them. He was like 15 years old. He studied under Heisenberg, as in the quantum mechanics Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Now, he has a theory in this paper called the Planck ether hypothesis. You guys can find his Planck ether hypothesis on the internet. But it essentially says we're going to take the ether and we're going to bring it back and we're going to adjust our viewpoint of what the ether is. It's not going to be this metaphysical substance, this liquid goo or whatever we were thinking, in the early 1900s or the 1800s. We're going to bring it back as this kind of quantum zero-point energy. Really, I mean, it is zero-point energy if you boil it down. So essentially, Friedrich Winterberg definitely believed in zero-point energy. He definitely believed in the ether. He even mentioned it right in here. And then he also says the Zitterbuergong, remember that vibration that Hal Puthoff was talking about? He says, this Zitterbuergong energy is negative. Now, why is this huge? Because when it comes to dark energy, physicists have been wondering, well, this dark energy must exist because we need to explain how the universe expanded faster than the speed of light when the Big Bang happened. We need a negative energy density to explain that. So what this is saying is that the zero-point energy is space-time. We just took a bunch of paint and we just spread it all over our universe. And that's what the Zitterbuergong is. That's what this negative energy is, that the zero-point energy is a negative energy density. It's relative negative energy. And if we tap into it, that means we can lower our ground state to a lower level. So this is the idea that the vacuum that we're in, it's a false vacuum. It's not really nothingness. But we remove that zero-point energy, and we get to the true vacuum. We get to the real nothingness. And that idea opens the door up to warp drives, wormholes, everything that Einstein's general relativity predicts should be real, including gravity waves as well. Now here's the man of the hour, Hal Puthoff's paper. He should win a Nobel Prize for this, Spacetime Metric Engineering. This is the paper that Tim Burchett held up at the UFO conference or UFO hearing in 2023, also known as polarizable vacuum model. This paper is actually pretty high level, where it essentially just goes over what would be the physical implications of manipulating space-time. So the big one that I like to talk about is time dilation, is that general relativity tells us that we are all in our own little bubble. And so what this means is that I can have a different rate of time than you guys have. So if my rate of time was slower, I would sound like I'm talking in slow motion. But if my rate of time was really fast, then I could talk like I'm really going really fast like this. But at the end of the day, my perspective, I would just seem like I'm normal. And from your perspective, you would seem like you're normal. But our relative perspective to each other, there would seem like there's this speed up or slow down effect. And that's where time travel and gravity manipulation, where when we manipulate space, we also manipulate time. So that would be the real physical effect that you would actually feel from something like that. And what it means is that you could get in a UFO, flying saucer, gravity manipulation device. You could go off to Alpha Centauri, and you could come back. And for you, it might seem like a 5-minute trip. But when you come back, it might be 5 years later. It might be 10 years later, depending on the time dilation effect. So that's why this paper is really important to understand, is that you have to understand from the UFO phenomenon, this isn't just about little green men and abductions. This is about what are the physical implications of this technology and what it's capable of doing. And the reality is, whenever you manipulate space, you're manipulating time. And how do we do this? How do we manipulate space-time? I mean, that's a big question everyone wants to know. How do you do it? The answer is you electrify the vacuum. The way I think about this is like, if I'm watching the TV and it's just a bunch of white noise on it, because back in the day we had to use antennas and things like that to tune in, that white noise represents the zero-point energy. This random waves in every direction all around us. When we put the plates together, some of those waves can't fit between the plates. That's what causes the Casimir effect. So if we want to manipulate that, what do? We need to cause order from chaos. So if we electrify the vacuum, we create an ordered structure where all that zero-point energy, all that chaos can't fit in there anymore. That's the concept of electrifying the vacuum, polarizing the vacuum, at least in my mind. That's how I conceptually think about it. Now, the next paper is an Eric W. Davis paper. He wrote 6 of the DIRDs, of the Defense Intelligence reference documents. My favorite one's probably this one, Traversable Wormholes, Stargates, and Negative Energy. So he explains the concept of negative energy, similar to how I've explained it to you, that it's a conceptual misunderstanding that we are in this ocean of energy, and that ocean of energy can be the negative energy. He explains how we might be able to produce negative energy in this paper as well, which you talk to mainstream academics, they'll say negative energy is this exotic substance that we can't produce it, we have no idea how to make it, we don't know if it's even real. Meanwhile, Eric Davis is like, here's like 5 different methods for producing negative energy in the lab. Okay, I mean, where's the disconnect there? I don't really get it. The negative energy requirement for a wormhole is arbitrarily small. This is another major misconception. It just blows my mind. If you talk to mainstream academics or science communicators, they think that we could make a wormhole, theoretically, but it would take this huge amount of energy. Matt Visser showed in a scientific paper, it could take an arbitrarily small amount of negative energy to create a wormhole. So, and then when I hear Eric W. Davis parodying that over and over, it tells me that that's got to be one of the key elements where mainstream academia is completely off base with, the public. With the black projects. And then the other thing, too, is there's different types of wormholes. So just like what Larry Maurer was explaining, is that the type of wormhole that we are talking about, the MH370 videos, is one where it's just a blip, like where it's getting sucked out of one location and sent to another location. This is actually very useful in when you're talking about time travel or space-time manipulation, because once we can manipulate time, now, like when I go somewhere, I'm going to a physical location, but I'm also going to a time location, which might be in the future, maybe in the past if we can do retrocausality. So the easiest kind of wormhole to make is one where what we saw, where you just make a bubble and then that bubble moves somewhere else. Because if you have a permanent stargate, like a stargate that's open and you're looking through it, time's going to flow at a different rate on the other side of the stargate than it's flowing on your side. Remember, everybody has their own dial. So that would be very bizarre, because not only would you be looking through a mirror at some other location, but the rate of time at that location might be flowing differently than your rate of time. In fact, I'm not even sure we can make a stargate. It might not be possible to have a temporal configuration like that that's a permanent setup. So what we're looking at is we're looking at a teleportation protocol that's not a permanent gateway between two locations. It's a temporary transition from one location to the next, which may seem small, but it's a detail that I think helps us from a scientific perspective understand how this stuff can work. And then warp drives dark energy in extra dimensions. So Eric W. Davis worked on this paper with Obusi. And I found Obusi randomly in a cold fusion conference from like 2012 that he was in with Harold Sonny White, and I believe it was George Miley. And so this paper, one of the big things I like about this is it explains Alcubierre's warp drive metric, which is apparently the concept for how we manipulate space-time, as the negative energy is extracting the 0-point energy that we need. And it says that the unification theory that figured this all out goes all the way back to 1926, or 1919, however you want to look at it, Kaluza-Klein theory. Kaluza-Klein unified electromagnetism and gravity using an extra dimension, the ether. So this has been solved since 1926, almost 100 years, 99 years ago. And the dark energy, just as I said before, is just 0-point energy. So we don't actually, with a 0-point energy model, we don't need dark energy. We don't need dark matter either, because the 0-point energy actually accounts for this extra stickiness that we need for galaxies to spin faster for dark matter. We don't need that anymore. We don't need dark energy anymore either. And as I said before, we've already accounted for mass, inertia, and gravity. So when it comes to the big questions about physics, 0-point energy is answering all of them for us. And then this paper is another Eric W. Davis paper, extracting energy from the quantum vacuum. And this is one of those defense intelligence reference documents. In fact, this paper has almost an identical name to another paper by a guy named Tom Bearden from about 20 years earlier to this. And his paper also says, basically, I think it's extracting quantum energy from the space-time vacuum. So many people were researching this concept. And again, Eric Davis was mentored by Robert Forward, who's the guy that figured out that the Casimir effect could charge a battery. And in this as well, he references inertial electrostatic confinement, IEC fusion. This is the name I would have you guys look up and check out. IEC fusion seems to be what these guys are calling this type of magnetic compression of plasma to produce fusion, is inertial electrostatic. And in this paper, Eric Davis reviews Ken Shoulders' ball lightning EVOs and says this is ideal for future research for extracting quantum energy. So this paper takes Robert Forward's first, okay, we're going to have two plates come together, we can charge it. How do we take this to the next level to figure out how can we make a permanent free energy type device? And the first things they were looking at is these balls of plasma that are just stable, that they think shouldn't be stable under a classical physics perspective. And then one of the more recent revelations was magnetohydrodynamic air-breathing propulsion and power for aerospace applications. This was Paul Siz again. And what I found out from this was that they can essentially use air as their fuel source. And so they can create a laser, a free electron laser that zaps the air and combines that with an onboard chemical. And that can be used as the fuel source, which means they don't need engines, they don't need rockets on their rocket things filled with fuel anymore. So this hypersonic design was based on the scramjet and ramjet hypersonic vehicles, mainly from Russia. One of the planes known as the Ajax. And once again, it uses a non-equilibrium plasmas. It actually shoots a laser in front of them, creates a plasma sheath, and these plasma sheaths reduce drag. So it allows the craft to move forward faster. And one of the big questions there is, why is the plasma reducing the drag? From the 0-point energy perspective, we can understand it. There's manipulating the 0-point energy. It's pushing away the 0-point energy means there's no inertia. There's no resistance anymore. So now that I understand why they were using these plasmas and hypersonics, one of the things that I came to the conclusion was that, oh, wow, they must have been using these plasma sheaths on their super secret spy planes in the 70s and what have you, and then drone technology came around. And they realized, we don't need the person, the spam in the can. We don't need the plane at all. All I need is the engine. All I need is the engine, turn it into a drone, put a bubble of plasma around it, we're ready to go. The Ajax bypass process was a generator that extracts energy upstream. Now that seems counterintuitive. How are you, if you have an engine process, how are you extracting energy upstream? Where is that energy, coming from in this case? It's really just a clever use of physics. So what these are is it's basically a tube. It's basically a tube where the air runs through the tube, and because we're moving around, the air is being pressed through the tube, and they use magnets, super powerful, superconducting magnets, to compress it. And when you compress it together, what happens? Fusion. Fusion can happen. In fact, they can control the motion of the electrons to an extreme degree where they can cause them to propel out the back as propulsion at basically whatever kinetic energy they want. They can slow the electrons down or speed them up. And what do they use for this? This was one of the most mind-blowing things. I started looking up, what kind of magnets do they use? I wanted to know, are we competing with China because we need their secret rare earth magnets? No, it turns out they use superconducting electromagnets. In fact, they use the exact same superconducting electromagnets that Ning Li and Potklanov were researching anti-gravity on in the 90s. These spinning YBCO superconductors. That's the exact same kind that they would use in these drones as well. So now I went, whoa, that's weird. Did we just connect the whole anti-gravity Ning Li and Potklanov thing now to potentially these hypersonic drones that Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and the Air Force were working on in the 90s? I think so. And the last part is the endothermic propulsion. When they use that air for fuel, it's like they say that they frack it and they kind of break it apart and then they mix it together with an onboard chemical that they have, and that's what they use as fuel. But they call it endothermic propulsion, which I thought was odd because when I was showing you guys that video earlier of the MH370, you can see these dark lines in front of the orbs. And at the time, I thought that was some form of endothermic propulsion because it's cold, it's black in the thermal, it's not hot. And so still looking into that, but I just find that to be a very interesting detail in this paper. Gravity wave communication by Robert M.L. Baker. Robert M.L. Baker was a Lockheed Martin engineer. He won a Lifetime Achievement Award for high-frequency gravity waves in 2011. Now, this is significant because we didn't even detect gravity waves until 2015 by LIGO. So this guy won a Lifetime Achievement Award for high-frequency gravity waves before we even detected one. And to be clear, Einstein is the one who said we were going to detect gravity waves, and then we did. A difference between a high-frequency gravity wave and a low-frequency gravity wave, low-frequency gravity wave would be like neutron stars in the cosmos colliding. That's what we're detecting with LIGO, with our interferometer that we detect these gravity waves. High-frequency gravity waves are much faster than that. These are things that are basically only produced in the lab. And how do we produce a high-frequency gravity wave? We just add energy. So once again, we have this space-time energy all around us. Now, if I want to make a gravity wave, I need to make a ripple like this. So what do? I add energy to a region very briefly and then remove it. And if I keep doing this over and over, I'm going to create a gravity wave. And that's all a high-frequency gravity wave is. It's really not that special. And all we have to do to produce that is we need a laser beam that is very, very powerful that can be focused onto a very, very specific point. And if we do that, then we make our gravity waves. It's actually a very simple concept to make gravity waves. And we can use them for many different things. We can use them for communications, to communicate with our plasma drones that we have if we want. We can use them for propulsion, obviously. We can make our reverse tractor beam, that laser beam that just pulls us forward. We can make telescopes out of these. We might be able to make microscopes out of them as well to get past the focal length requirement. And so this is a possibility where if I explain what gravity wave could do, the analogy I like to use is that if we have these on satellites in outer space, we can probably map the entire Earth all the way through. Like if there's cavities or caves in the Earth. And why this might be important for the archaeology thing is like that whole stuff going on with the pyramids right now and mapping underneath it, they can definitely do that with gravity waves. With gravity waves, they can penetrate and they can find any type of cavities that might be hidden under any object. In fact, I would be surprised if they're not already using them. And just as speculation, I would say that I'm very skeptical about Antarctica and what's going on down there. If they have some secret apparatus, an antenna that's actually a gravity wave device would be exactly what type of thing I would expect. And they would just call it something else, like their ELF or neutrino detector or whatever it is. The laser lightcraft nanosatellites. This one is I have on here because it explains the concept of these free electron lasers. And just recently, a couple years ago, there was a CERN scientist who was explaining these free electron plasma lasers. And I'm pretty sure that's what Eric Davis was explaining in this paper 20 years before that. So it goes to show how far advanced they are from the public in general. We don't actually need a physical sail in these laser light sails. I think that's the big misconception, is when we think about this laser light sail, you're imagining like this sail in front of you and you're like shooting a laser at it to push it forward. Like, no, they can actually just set up the laser in a way where the laser path itself just creates a ripple, a wave that you ride upon. And that's what I think is the difference between the public's perception of these papers and what they do and what they can really pull off. And once again, then, what are we producing? We're producing a gravity wave. We're producing a gravity wave because all a gravity wave is a change in the metric of space-time. And space-time is just filled with energy. So if we add energy to it, that's mass. That's going to have gravitational pull. So if you imagine, if I put a black hole in front of me, it's going to pull me forward like this, right? That's all they're doing. And if I want to create a wave, then I just pulse it. Put a little bit in there. That's it, guys. It's not magic. It's just clever use of physics. That's it. And then here's another one of my favorite papers that I came across recently was The Space-Time Communication Implications of Quantum Entanglement and Non-Locality, written by John Kramer, who is an experimental nuclear physicist. And it says we can do faster than light communication. Well, at least we can do speed of light communication, or essentially what we can do here is we can create a situation where we can control a Mars rover from Earth in real time. And you might go, wait, what, Ashton? Doesn't it take like 10 minutes for light to get from the Earth to Mars? How can we control the Mars rover in real time? That's exactly what John Kramer has figured out from this scientific paper. Right now, the big pushback is that we say, well, yes, we can do this quantum teleportation, but we can't teleport information. It would violate the no information theorem or whatever it is. John Kramer says, if you look at the EPR experiments, which is where they're testing the double slit to see if the wave function breaks down or not, he said, if you look at all those experiments, one of them figured out, they said, you know what, if I change one of my spins on one of my entangled particles, yes, it can impact this one, but I can never measure to figure out how I changed this, because if I try to measure what I did over here, it breaks the whole thing. The whole thing collapses and falls apart. So there's no easy way to say, I'm going to send a signal from this entangled particle to this one. So instead, what they figured out was, don't try to send the signal directly from the actual atom or whatever you're trying to measure. Just set up your wave function so that you build out your wave function, and we can create a switch. We can create a switch where we just turn the wave function off or on. So it goes from either a wave function or to two slits. And now, what did we do when we created that switch? We just created binary. Now it doesn't matter. I don't have to send you a message at all. Now all I have to do is turn the light switch off or on. So from my perspective, if I'm sending the signal, now I'm just sending it off or on. You're just going to see an interference pattern or no interference pattern on your side. And now you go, okay, I can turn that into binary. I can turn that into Morse code. I can turn that into a communication method. And that's exactly what they've done. That's why when, I'm about to go on Tim Pool again, but that's why I wanted to talk to Tim Pool, because he said he's seen the papers that show we've got quantum communication methods. Well, that's exactly how they're doing it. They created a switch. And then the next thing is he says, okay, here's the other problem with quantum entanglement. Non-locality or retrocausality. We can theoretically, if we engineer these EPR experiments, you can change the distance on one side of it. So you send one entangled particle this way, and you look at it, see what's going to happen. That's your telling the future. And then with this other one, we send it down this long pathway that sends it out into the future. And then we don't know what's going to happen to it. If we do that, it should, in theory, we're like figuring out information in the future that we shouldn't know. This shows retrocausality. It was John Wheeler that created the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment that showed this. So John Kramer says, okay, we've got this problem. Retrocausality should be possible based on this experiment, but nobody likes the idea of going back in time. All the famous physicists thought it shouldn't be possible. Nature's not going to allow it. So he says, here's the solution. Let's just engineer out the retrocausality. Let's not even think about the retrocausality. Let's not worry about it. We can engineer the experiment to work however we want. So let's engineer it so it's not retrocausal at all. That way, we're not going to have any problem about going back in time or breaking the multiverse or whatever else we're going to do. I just thought that was a beautiful solution. And when you read something like that in a scientific paper, that's something that they're not just speculating about that. That's the type of situation where they're going, this is what we have to do to make it work. I mean, why would you throw that one very specific solution out there? So let's listen to John Kramer, because I thought this guy was going to be somebody who was like all about just, quantum entanglement, things like that. But then I find this video of him that he kind of got he was at some kind of conference very similar to this one, and somebody's just doing an impromptu interview with him. And at the end, he says this. I think this is it. Okay. There he is.
Tomorrow I'm talking about reaching the stars by accelerating a wormhole to very high velocities and shooting them at the stars and using relativistic time dilation to get there almost instantaneously.
So you fly through the wormhole?
You send the wormhole there, send momentum-bearing particles through it to steer it around where you want it. You land it, and then you expand it and get out and explore the planet.
I see.
Tomorrow I'm talking about reaching...
That's be the best laugh that I've ever seen in my life by anybody. And so how wild is that? He has, right before that he says, yes, I'm doing all this EPR stuff. What I really love is like the warp drive stuff, the wormhole stuff, the flying through space. And I'm going, wow. And he's got a really specific explanation for how he does it. You send an object out to the destination that you want to go to, and then you expand it and you walk out on that side of it. And this will happen, he says, from a relativistic perspective. For you, it's going to appear instantaneous. And I go back and I look at the video we were just watching on the MH370, and I go, wait, is that what's happening in there? Like, did they send an orb off to the destination that they wanted to go to? And then you have the orb spin around it, and then boom, what's happening when they converge on the plane? They're opening up that wormhole on the other side, and that plane's going to appear on the other side. And I'm connecting now, I'm going, okay, John Kramer's got this very specific teleportation protocol that he's explaining. He's explaining what we can do from an EPR perspective. And then we just listened to Larry Maurer from Unitel in the early 2000s basically explaining the same thing. So now I'm confident to say that when it comes to wormholes, I think a wormhole is our scientific, mathematical understanding of this bridge between space and time. But the physical mechanism by which it's going to occur is akin to quantum tunneling, which is that we're pushing through that barrier of space-time and then appearing somewhere else. In fact, the way Bob and I were talking about yesterday is it's more of like an optical illusion. You're tricking reality to render you in a different location than you were before, which then opens up the question about like, what are we even living in right now? What is our reality? And just another fun paper here is about invisibility cloaking in the DIRDs. And what I loved about this paper was that when it gets to it gets down all the different forms of invisibility cloaking yourself, the best one is space-time manipulation. Bending space-time around you entirely renders you entirely invisible. And this then connects back to the Philadelphia experiment, where they theoretically teleported a battle cruiser in 1943 using extremely powerful degaussers, which I think has credibility because those degaussers could have pushed aside that zero-point energy and caused a craft to tunnel. Honorable mention, coherent matter wave beam patent by Lockheed Martin. This is from 2011, 2013, somewhere in that range. What can this do? Atomic scale manufacturing. So this can actually produce like a microchip or maybe even a metamaterial at atomic layer. More powerful than a laser, either 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000 times more powerful than a laser. So what did we say we needed for gravity waves? We need a very powerful laser. What do we have here in this coherent matter wave beam? Extremely powerful laser. And the last thing is transporting matter at a distance. And let me just take a look at the time. Okay, I think we only got 2 more slides. So I'm going to play this clip as well. Oops, that's not the right one. Here it is. So this is Charles Chase. He's actually the patent holder for the coherent matter wave beam patent.
This is something my colleague, Dr. Mo Arman, and myself, is really Mo's idea, but I helped him with that. This is a way of generating matter wave beams. So rather than a laser beam, it's a matter beam with fermions, and we're using our Harnaff bomb effect to put things, fermions, in coherence, which sounds like, wow, that doesn't sound like that would work. Because there's you can modify the fermions with no energy exchange. And so we predict that we'll be able to put those in coherent and generate a beam. And people have done those with Bose-Einstein condensates, at very low temperature. But using one of those constraints, Lorentz invariance, well, that fermion condensate is a beam in a different reference frame. So in my mind, that shows you can build a beam out of fermions, a million times more powerful than a laser, plus atomic scale manufacturing and maybe transport of matter over a distance.
So the coherent matter wave beam patent, what is that? What is that even doing? A laser is bosons that can collapse onto a single point. Fermions cannot collapse onto a single point, or can they? If fermions, the thing that prevents my hand from going through this table, can collapse onto a single point, now we can make a laser out of solid matter. And what Charles Chase is saying there is that doesn't seem like that should be possible. It doesn't seem like this table should be able to collapse down onto a single point. But he's saying that with Lorentz invariance, we can control the variables, and theoretically from a different reference frame, since we're all living in our own little bubbles all the time, theoretically that can turn into a wave function, should be theoretically possible. And there's your patent right there for it, your coupled resonant cavities. Look how small that is, 10 microns across. So when we're talking about how advanced are the defense contractors in their lithography or manufacturing, extremely advanced. That's very, very, very tiny. And it's just a resonating chamber of cavities. And then I think this is the last one, which is U.S. Navy engineer Salvatore Pais's patents. He's actually a good friend of mine now as well. His patent's high frequency gravity wave generator. I mean, we just talked about gravity waves. High energy electromagnetic field generator. This is what you would use to push out that 0-point energy, push that 0-point energy away. Inertial mass reduction for a transmedium craft. If we create that laser beam that pulls us forward, we can minimize the inertia with our plasma sheath, and then we can essentially just float. And we can do this in water or air, maybe in outer space. High temperature superconductor. The idea here is basically it takes a vibrating lattice and it causes Cooper pair formation, which causes electrons to tunnel or to pair up and move without any resistance. And then the last one is this plasma compression fusion device, which basically takes counter-rotating vortices, magnetic vortices, compressing them down to cause fusion to occur, which is very similar to the idea of those scramjet, ramjet designs with the magnetic compression through the airflow. And then here's a quick video where Salvatore Pais was featured on the Y-Files recently. And I think that's our last thing for today. So here you go.
A scientist named Salvatore Pais has multiple patents strikingly similar to allegedly impossible inventions. He's patented devices that use electromagnetic fields, vibrations, and quantum field fluctuations to manipulate gravity, mass, and energy. He has a patent that allows for faster than light speed travel. He has a patent that can change the course of asteroids through a magnetic field. And my favorite Salvatore Pais invention? He has a patent for a tiny solid-state device about the size of a deck of cards that can generate unlimited clean energy from the vacuum. So how come his inventions aren't suppressed? Well, because the patents are owned by or have been assigned to the United States Navy. Now, I'm sure that most clean energy anti-gravity inventors are frauds, but not all of them. I believe the technology does exist, and I believe it's being used right now by government contractors.
It definitely is. And so just to clarify, because I've spoken to Sal several times, Sal got these patents approved and went through the patent process because he couldn't get the scientific papers published, because the peer review process has failed us. Not even a guy who's an active Navy engineer that's worked on private defense contractor secret projects can get their papers approved because academia is so rigid. And so instead, they went and got patents approved with the U.S. Navy's backing. And when the patent office came back and said, this isn't possible, this is not consistent with the laws of physics, you can't achieve these high electromagnetic energy fluxes that these patents say, not only did the lawyers of the patent office come back, the chief technical officer of the Navy came in and said, it's real, you need to approve these patents. At the end of the day, they only got 3 of the 5 patents approved, which goes to show we still have a long way to go, especially because if you just watch this whole presentation, you know this is not the area of pseudoscience. What happened was Sal admits, or is adamant, that he came up with these ideas on his own, but clearly he must have had inspiration. And that inspiration, in my opinion, as we saw here, comes from people like Frank Mead, Hal Puthoff, Robert Forward, Eric W. Davis, etc. His ideas are exactly along the lines of theirs with zero-point energy. And what he told me directly was that Hal Puthoff, Eric Davis, Jay Stratton, those UFO guys, they basically prevented him from getting his own team set up with Space Force to investigate the high-energy electromagnetic field generator. And why? Because they've already solved it. As we saw from here, the Air Force Research Lab already figured it out in the 2000s, maybe even in the 90s. And the last thing they want is a guy from the Navy to also figure it out, a guy who's doing it publicly with the patents publicly as well. So at the end of the day, what I want you guys to take from this is, I don't look at this as a good or bad. I see there's gatekeepers, there's people who want the information to come out. We don't live in a black and white world. And I think that some of the people here that I've researched their papers, they're people that I look up to highly from a scientific perspective. But at the same time, this is technology that would change the world for the better, like overnight, within an instant. And so we deserve to have this come out, especially because our tax dollars are paying for this. Most of this money is coming from our tax dollars, and it's being hidden from us. So thank you guys for listening to my presentation on zero-point energy today. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope... Thank you very much. And big thank you to all the supporters. Everybody's been following along. I know I've met a lot of you guys here during this. It's been awesome to talk to you. And I love that the people that have kind of followed with this journey with me as well. I think it's amazing that we're at the point now where we can, present these scientific papers. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Bob now. Thank you guys very much.
Awesome, man. I want to say thank you to my friend Ashton Forbes. I think in the last near 2 years, he has done more for getting this scientific paper and understanding out to the wider community in the world than almost anyone else in the world. So thank you very much. It is a deep honor to be with you here today and to follow Ashton. What I'll ask first is that we take a 15-minute break. So, you can go and ruminate on that. What I will say is that think about, can I have a show of hands of who saw my presentation on Saturday morning? Well, fair quantity. So I'll go through pretty quickly because I know some people were disappointed they weren't up in time. So I'll do a quick run over that. I'll talk about something that I didn't explain, which I said I would, but I then forgot. And so remind me if I don't say it again this time. And then we've got a whole set of props. We've got some plasma globes down here. We've got a torsion field generator. I'm going to need someone to volunteer a little bit later to hold a poster up. So anyone wants to stand on stage and do that, let me know. So think about whether that's you. We have an infrared camera so that people can see what infrared imaging looks like. And so lots of exciting things to play with after my blather. Go and have a piss break, a coffee break or whatever, and we'll see you in 15 minutes. Okay, thank you very much for joining me here today. I want to thank the organizers of the Cosmic Summit 2025 for putting on this incredible venue and for getting the word out so that you could all be here to join Ashton and I today. I hope everyone agrees it's an extremely good conference, right? Yeah? Okay, so for the benefit of those that were here and maybe asleep on Saturday, and those that weren't here because they were asleep, I will just do a quick run through of where we were. So I did a presentation I called Annihilating Time and Space, Teleportation to the Cosmic Summit, because I hate planes. I would like to solve teleportation because I hate planes. So I asked a question. No one who was here on Saturday answered the question. I want newbies to answer this. How fast do you think you're moving through space? What? Essentially, you could be moving relative to another galaxy at up to 2 times the speed of light because of the expansion of the universe. Do you feel bad about moving that quickly? No? Yes? Who feels bad? You feel bad. Would you like a much slower pace? You what? Right, that's right, yeah. Yeah, so that's interesting. We can actually move very, very quickly and it not cause a problem. It's just acceleration and deceleration that's the problem. And then I asked the question, how do you perceive time? Just not to labor the point, but essentially, if these apples were there on the table and you came back 2 months later, what would they look like unless they were American apples? They would what? They would look like a rotten mush, right? And that's because there's biological processes. Biological processes are doing chemical processes. Chemical processes are based on electrons. And so an electron process is allowing you to perceive time when you come back in that room. Now, you might have been in a coma, sadly. Hopefully that never happens to anyone. But you go away, you come back, and there's rot on the table. And you assume that time has passed from that visual representation. Now, if I was to throw a ball, I should have got a ball and thrown it at someone, right? But if that had hit someone in the room, imagine you've got hit and you feel that. How are you feeling that? You're suing? It didn't happen. In your mind. Yeah, so it's like when it hits your nerves, and they're sending a message, and they're sending a message through an electronic impulse, a chemical electronic-based impulse. So basically, every way that you perceive time is something to do with the behavior of electrons. So if you change the behavior of electrons, or even switch the behavior of electrons off, you can't perceive time. So the apple was very important in the Bible, for the fruit of the tree of knowledge, except it isn't in the Bible. It's just a fruit, it's not the apple. But people assume it's the apple. And so Isaac Newton, a great alchemist, used the apple as a metaphor, or it's said to be, how he thought about gravity. And of course, from my point of view, it is connected to the phenomena of both transmutation, that is alchemy, and also gravity. And we see these apple structures in our experiments. So what you've seen from Ashton is a lot of papers talking about potential science that may be possible or is be possible, has been covered up be possible, but we don't know because there's not the actual experimental evidence in there. What I've had the deep honor to do over the last 12 years is to meet some of the best scientists, some of them sadly are not with us anymore, or to recover materials from some of these scientists, and to conduct experiments such that we have the hard evidence that proves that this is possible. Now, if anyone is in any doubt that you know that this is possible, I want you to come away from this session today to know that you know that this is possible. So if you've got a question that needs to be answered to remove any doubt, let's get that question answered. What you're seeing here is the magnetohydrodynamics going on in this cavitation reactor from Bin-Zhen Huang. I co-authored a paper with him and his colleagues. He's a 50-year professor at Taipei University, thermodynamics professor. He was handed an anomalous, in fact, a number of anomalous heat-producing heat exchangers. And he investigated why it was happening. I suggested you would find these kind of structures in there if it was what I thought it was, and we found thousands and thousands of them. That is burrowed 50% into copper oxide, a copper pipe, like you get in your heating, right? And how is it even possible that a hydrodynamic vortex can bury itself? And it always buries itself in either like that or like that. And that's because it's EH. So sometimes the substructure is burying in 50% that way, and sometimes it's burying in 50% that way. But what you're seeing is the apple part of the structure. You can even see up here, I don't know if my mouse is going to do something there, there's actually almost like an apple core coming out. And that tells you where the vortex is pulling in the matter, the chi, the 0 point energy. And it's coming in. Now, I'm going to change the frame here, and I'm going to go to a frame where it's still 20 microns. I've just moved to a different part of the sample, and I've rotated at exactly the same scale that apple part of the magnetohydrodynamic structure, but that upper part has disappeared. And you're seeing the internal wheels that within that apple structure that you saw on the previous frame. So I go forward and back. You can see the apple shape, and you can see the internal hydrodynamic vortex. That actually is what I call fat Oreos. And again, on these substructures, these wheels that were a pair of them minimally is making the bigger wheel, which I've represented there by the red sort of torus impression there. There are 3 versions of that on that little slide, and there's one orphaned over to the left. You have the one that I'm looking at, and it's trying to fold over onto the other one. So the outer structures collapsed. The 2 internal apple structures, which represent as what I call fat Oreos, is still persisted after the outside came. And the one on the bottom right is starting to fold over. The one that's flat in the top left, they're trying to move round on each other. Again, you can imagine it's the same thing going on. And in the top right, you've got one Oreo by itself, but there's a little hole in that top right there. And I don't know whether I have this slide. No, I don't. The actual central core of the vortex actually is making a little hexagonal or pentagonal hole on the top right of that. It's actually lost the subcore there. So this is the overall structure, excluding the non-radiating boundary. What do I mean by that? That is the bubble that was being talked about by the what is it called? The MHD guys that were talking about the orbs going around, those things, right? That company, was it to, who can everyone remember? Oh, yeah, someone was listening to Ashton, great. So Unitel, and 3 is okay, but 2 is the minimum, and that creates a bubble in space-time. Now, can anyone in here imagine what it would be like to be inside a proton? Just project yourself, remote view, inside a single proton. What is it like in there? Hello, I'm in a proton. Warm and fuzzy. Is it really, though? What? Crowded. Interesting. Chaotic. I don't think it's crowded. I don't think it's warm, and I don't think it's chaotic. I think it's highly, highly organized. And it has a different space-time inside that proton to outside it. And it has, and you can look at, I think it's a Stanford Linear Accelerator, SLAC, they actually did a study of the ether pressure or the gradient from the center of the torus that would make the structure of the proton out to the boundary of the proton's radius. Okay? And you see a depressurization in the azimuth going through the center of the proton. So it's highly ordered, and this has been done by mainstream science. So what you're looking at is the depressurization is through the conical vortex, like that, okay? This is not exactly correct, but this is a phi ratio cone, and the vortex reduces in that ratio, okay? So if you drew a circle of unit 1 and you do 1 over 1.618 and you get 0.618, you get another circle, and then you repeat that and you get a cone like that, and that is actually the vortex that goes in. Now, that is the outer domain of it. It actually works within that space, okay, depending on the structure, okay? And it then comes up to your torus like that. Now, the torus itself is made of subtors, and when you have a minimum of 2 subtors, you can imagine those structures over here on the right as a current loop, and this is a current counter loop. Yeah, that's going to produce a magnetic vector that way and a magnetic vector that way. So you get a magnetic loop here, and that produces a toroidal moment. Okay? And because you can see here, I have a substructure here, and that substructure has a substructure, and I'm going into the right-hand one here, which has its own apple. Okay? I'm going to the next level here. You can see that substructure now has a substructure, and that substructure has a substructure. Yeah? You get it? And this produces all of the vorticity at all of the fractal levels. Okay, it explains tornadoes. Now, there are only two structures in nature that can do negentropy. One, the vortex. It takes matter that's in a state of chaos and disorder, high state of entropy, and it coheres it to the phase singularity. And the ring soliton, like a smoke ring, yeah? And the smoke ring is minimally one torus and another torus, as I show. So ultimately, life is driven by vortexes. All life. Now, what does this give you access to? It gives you unlimited energy anywhere, because there's a rarefied medium, and Boyd Bushman, when he was close to passing from the mortal coil, and he was, that's when people get honest. He did a video where he talked about Lockheed Martin. I think he developed the Stinger missile. And he talks about the fact that the John Hutchison effect, anti-gravity, an energy technology that is way, way beyond fusion being developed at Lockheed Martin, were all related in the same conversation to the neutrino-verse. Now, what do you mean by that? Well, there's normal nuclear neutrinos. They are, basically, they don't interact with matter. But there's something that's like equivalent to not the gamma rays, but the infrared or radio waves. It's about as similar as gamma rays and radio waves. There's a thing called low-energy neutrinos or relic neutrinos. It depends whether they're synthetic or natural. And these have been determined by a guy who I translated his book, Dr. Alexander Parkhomov, over a long period of time through up to 20 years of experimentation of inverse beta decay, to be in the range, and through diffraction gratings, to be microns to millimeters. Now, in Russia, there's an argument, and this is actually relevant to what I'm going to be talking about, that the actual things he's observing are clusters of relic neutrinos. But what we know for certain from his data is that they are able to be partially reflected by dense matter, and that they cause inverse beta decay. What does that mean? If I had a nickel-63 battery made in China, produced from nickel-62 that's been hit by a load of neutrons from a reactor, and that's decaying over 100 years, that's decaying with a natural decay rate. That's why it lasts for 100 years. But if I was to hit this with a beam of these relic neutrinos, that decay rate would greatly accelerate. Okay? So you could have a higher output if you wanted. You could dial the output up and down. And so he used cobalt-60, which has about a 3.6-year half-life. Much better because it's a metal, and it's not hydrogen, tritium, because tritium's a gas, and it's hard to have that as a target. So he used that. And rather than getting what you normally see in the energy spectrum like this, as the energy that you get coming out of the beta particles with the balance of the energy coming out in, I've got to get this right, a neutrino of some type, let's put it like that. A neutrino comes in, annihilates the antineutrino in there, and you just get the electron coming out, and it's all at energy max. And so he screened for that in his target by having aluminium foil, and this allowed for proving that what he was lensing was able to stimulate inverse beta decay, which means it is some form of neutrino-like structure. 100% certainly, no doubt about it. This is one of the leading experts in this kind of measurement in the world ever that's lived. So, I've talked about how you can get the unlimited energy a little bit there, and we're going to go into more detail. Faster than light propulsion, faster than light communication is because neutrinos are 1.95 Kelvin universe-wide, and they are at 1 temperature, so they're already coherent universe-wide. They pervade all matter. And so they are superfluid, not the clusters thereof, they're a gel. The relic neutrinos, the LC dipoles, they are a superfluid, and when you put information in there with the fractal toroidal moment, which your brains can create, it persists for all time. It is the Akashic record, okay? But it means you have if you put the information in here, it's everywhere all at the same time. You can receive it instantaneously at any point in the universe because it all shares the same wave function. So that's your faster than light communication. Teleportation, so I will go a little bit more. Don't let me forget what I need to say. Interaction with the Akashic record I've just gone into there, and interaction with matter and consciousness. So I imagine when you're a little bit groggy, let's say you've had too many whiskeys the night before. Not looking at you, Phil. I looked at you because you started going like this. Essentially, when your brain is spinning up, I imagine that your microtubules in there are all these kind of things that have a toroidal moment, and they manifest through the overall structure of your brain into your unique fractal toroidal moment that's driven by your DNA. I talked about this last year. But essentially, it's not in the conscious state when you're coming out of unconsciousness. Everything's got to go into coherence so that you can express your ego. So you're dialing up and revving up your system to get into the point of your Q factor that links to your Akashic record. Now, I'll give you a tip, guys. If anyone thinks I can find out stuff and they don't understand how I do it, I get myself really tired. Really freaking exhausted. And so my body is never on my ego. It's somewhere between I really want to go to sleep and I'm trying to boot up my consciousness. And so by being in that state, I can think outside the box because I'm not in my own little confined worldview. Now, Ken Shoulders described this as being, he had all of his greatest understanding between the state of sleep and wake. And a lot of people who are creatives will say that the best ideas come to them in that kind of part of sleep. Well, I'm saying you can shortcut this circuit by exhausting yourself. It's not health advice. I know I'm in America now, so I can't give you health advice. Okay? All right. So I talk about this. I've basically gone through that. And essentially you can see that through the vortex here, that's where because of the toroidal moment, because both the relic neutrino LC dipole has an anapole, which is a special case of the toroidal moment. It was discovered by Yakov Zeldovich in 1954. And then clusters that have a toroidal moment, fractal toroidal moment, they get pulled into these structures, into the phase singularity. The phase singularity is the cross point of the ankh. So you can see in the apple structure there, the bottom of the ankh goes down to the bottom of the apple. The top of the loop, that is the phase space for the toroidal moment. So the toroidal moment, when you have this, and I'm going to put this down and shout. Ready? Oh, no, I'm going to go over here. That'll be easier. Stupid boy. All right, okay. So, I haven't got a proddy thing right now, so I'm going to do it like this. Imagine this isn't a cone. Imagine this is a rod, right? It can go like this, up and down, with amplitude and frequency. It can go there and there, depending on the number of tores that are in the substructure. So it can be pulled over that way, it can go around and be pulled over that way, and you can vary the frequency there. So it can go in and out at amplitude and frequency, right? And then it's got the angular momentum at every single fractal level. And that is how it can encode information. And because it's encoding information into the superfluid, the Akashic record, it's always going to exist for all of time. And if you are tuned into that, you can receive that information back. So I showed last year there was a 2023 paper published on June the 15th from Sydney Technical University, and they showed that during cognitive tasks in a conscious state, the people they were assessing using functional magnetic resonance imaging had, and basically oxygenated blood is diamagnetic, deoxygenated blood is paramagnetic. They show magnetic vortices and anti-vortices. That is the minimum for producing the toroidal moment. They didn't talk about how this relates to consciousness and memory and connection to spirits and all that kind of stuff, but this is how it works. This is the science behind magic, okay? And this is why I feel when I get near to some of these experiments, I feel really freaking weird. I kind of feel weird most of the days, but anyway. Okay, so, and what you've got, and this is by Wisniewski in 2008, you can go and look at the link there, bit.ly-Dirac-Mon. I'm translating this into in English, but you can imagine that he's done it upside down. The electrons come into phase coherence, they form Cooper pairs, and they come down to what that you see on the far right there. That's what's called a ring singularity. And that is what's called a centripetal de Broglie wave. So the wave function of the electron, if you can imagine it a wave, is going around in a circle, right? And that's the same as John Archibald Wheeler's Geons. It's a wave function going around like that. And it closes in on itself so it doesn't cancel itself out, okay? And that is a matter wave, okay? And because it's a boson, because you've had 2 electrons coming in, you can see the electrons coming in, and they are, because of the way that it works, they end up 180 degrees out of phase, and so they end up being able to cohere into a boson, and then they come down and they end up producing this. It's got a particular distance that it can form at. It can't get any closer. But then that is the model of a core of a Kerr-Newman black hole. It's a ring singularity superconducting current. Okay? And so it has then at the center a magnetic topological monopole. Okay? And it doesn't matter what strength you need to do the magic, because it's got a high Q factor and a low loss. It's like Tesla said, when a snowball's rolling down a mountain, it'll accrue snow, and sooner or later it will vanquish anything. And that is the point. And John Cramer actually said in 1983 that if you could find a monopole, that it will cause baryons, protons and neutrons, it will cause the quarks inside them to lose their identity and it will just fall apart. And he said in 1983 that if we could do this, we basically have got energy solved. That is what I'm going to show you. So here's 3 sub-orbs. And I've got them in an arrangement, so they're at 120 degrees, and they've made a macro larger orb, right? So that is 3 wheels within making 1 wheel. And you can see from experimentation, not I think this can do this, or I hope it can do it, or please give me money for my patent that says it thinks it can do it. This is actually triangular holes in the Amasa vibration system. So a vibrating plate in water created a magnetohydrodynamic structure. Why? Because water is polar. It's already charge separated. When you start spinning that around, it starts making a current. When you spin it around that way and like that, which happens on a surface, an interface at a standing wave node, you end up starting to produce a magnetic core. And like I say, it doesn't matter how much that strength of that magnetic core accrues at, sooner or later it will vanquish anything. But the curious thing is that inside those triangular holes in that vortex, which is a bit weird to think, you have little circles, spheres, in the corners of the hole. And they are the cores of the subtors of the 3 structures on each side that are forming the macro tor. And you can even see the triangular structure coming down if you squint your eyes. On the right, this is from Neil Crichton Gold, sadly departed. And it's a spiral galaxy. And Winston Bostick said, this explains everything from subatomic particles all the way up to galaxies, when he was doing his work on plasmatoroids, acaplasmoids. So that is in a Lehner system, which is a dry system using deuterium oxide, heavy water, diamonds, and nickel in the core. That's outside of the core. So the clusters had come from the inside of the core. They had teleported through to the outside and got stuck on the interface between the fused quartz. This is very important. They couldn't go through the fused quartz easily, although sometimes they did, right? And it got trapped on that, and then the copper oxide of the former copper wire that was round, and it created a 3-order structure on the top right there. On the bottom right, we have a 3-order structure in Henk Uren's experiment. It's actually imaged from this sample here, where you see a 15-millimeter section from that standard copper pipe, which instantaneously disappeared. You see it on the video as a sphere, and then the sphere disappears, and that hole is there. It's not melted. It's like disappeared. And when we look on the boundary, we see all of the structures. I've just given one on the right there. And when you have 3, you have a vortex coming in. Here's 5. Oh, it's the structure of an apple. Oh, look at that. It's exactly and precisely showing you how the technology works. The frickin' apple. It's the key to knowledge. The secret of all hidden technology is embedded into the apple. So this was a poppy in the moat around the Grandmaster's house in Rhodes. They had these poppies all the way around there, and they have this mark in the center, which I think, like, did they breed that? For those, this is basically Andrei Puthoff and saying about how when you took a huge battery to start the motors on submarines, they threw one of those huge switches with the big copper things, you know, on them, and it's meant to withstand hundreds of thousands of amps. And they said they had some, like a spanner or a wrench or whatever, and sometimes they threw the switch and the spanner just disappeared. Okay, this is with DC current. But what is actually happening there? You've got a current that wants to flow and it's suddenly shorted out. You've got like a bucking current. And this produces topological monopoles. Now, Leonid Orytskev, who was a mainstream physicist in the Russian Federation, in the Soviet Union at that time, he was brought in to try and work out what had happened in Chernobyl. Not the HBO documentary, which is great cinema, but it's nonsense, right? And he said that in reactor 4, there was a turbine, and it was stopped, because of the way it was stopped, there was a huge back EMF. This produced a lot of monopoles that went through in the water, and I believe it's in the oxygen dissolved in the water, and it went through, and he describes, and if I haven't shared this, I will share it on the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project's YouTube channel. All of the metal flew off the wall. People that were there saw orbs moving around in the reactor. There were the graphite blocks that are about this big, that were inside the RBMK reactor, which are designed to moderate the neutrons coming out. They had come out. There's a 2,000-ton hood on this reactor. Somehow they'd come out. So had the block lifted the 2,000-ton hood? I don't know. They'd gone up into the sky and landed down outside the reactor. And they're incredibly brittle. He created this 2-ton gamma camera. And if you looked at the lens on the gamma camera, there's a real problem with gamma. You can't actually image gamma because it just goes through everything and it damages everything. They had to invent a gamma camera. And when you looked at the lens on it, it looks like one of those Celtic sort of score things. It's a quantum lens, right? And with this, it's like if you've got a modern smartphone in here, the technology that they use to create the screening of your semiconductor, the actual thing, it looks like nonsense. Like the actual thing that they pass the UV light through, or the EUV light, it doesn't look anything like the circuit they're trying to make. They have to backpropagate through deep understanding of wave interference in a quantum calculation how it works. This is why it's so difficult to just go ahead and set up a fab, right? They had to do this on a massive scale, and they used the world's largest ever built helicopter to carry this thing 400 meters above Chernobyl. And do you know what? They couldn't find the core. It hadn't melted down. It hadn't gone anywhere. And then they started investigating what happened. Every single part of the building, whether it be the concrete, the steel girders, the graphite, pure graphite blocks, had the reactor's core smeared into it. The reactor's core had somehow become part of a macro quantum object that when that collapsed, it had deposited, and in let's say, the graphite blocks, there were actual chunks of material that contained uranium, but also a wide range of transmutated materials. So that something had caused a complete anomaly. He also saw things like there was a big steel vessel, and it was in one part of the reactor, but when they went in there, it was found in another part of the reactor. And there was no way it could get from that part of the reactor and to that part of the reactor. No physical way. There were beams that were intersecting each other. They hadn't hit each other. One had come and occupied part of the space-time of the other beam. So I will translate this, but it's the most head thing you've ever heard someone say. And he says, I'm doing this because people that worked on the cleanup for Chernobyl are dying, and this story will be never told if I don't say it. And it's because of the anomalies that he saw at Chernobyl as a mainstream Soviet physicist that he decided to come and work in cold fusion, which is called in Russia cold nuclear transmutation and ball lightning. They're not shy about calling it what it is. So, obviously, when you're talking about teleportation, you want to look at the Philadelphia experiment. Well, This is a document. It's one of the 2 documents really that are out there. One of the guys in here that we're going to refer to, supposedly was discredited. But the way I look at these things, I don't look at it as, is this someone creatively coming up with a thought, or is this someone who actually witnessed the event? Because as a remote viewer, I know, and as creatives know, they can tap into a reality and present it as their reality because for some reason they know it's true, but they didn't actually experience it. So I just thought, okay, all right, some people discredit it. Well, let's just assume what the information is, and let's see how it matches up to the science that does all this magic. Oh, there's a UFO on there. So USS Eldridge is 102 yards long. Hold that in your mind. It's 12.166 yards wide. It's not actually that wide. It's quite a small ship, actually. And up to 32 from the height from the keel to the masthead. So right, the bit under the sea, right, all the way up to the masthead. Okay? So I thought I'd take our magnetohydrodynamic structure, which produces exactly and precisely the same structure, whatever system you look at. And I have a Griffin-Brock electrode over here and the SEM imaging that we're going to hold up in a little minute, so get ready. It says here, von Neumann's system produced a central rotating electromagnetic field. Interesting. At a critical frequency, this rotated the position of the time field in relation to the ship, and that was what allowed it to become invisible. The result was complete invisibility of the ship, 1943. It was effective in an oblate spheroidal shape. Now, why did that make me freak out when I read that? Because a Kerr-Newman black hole, which has a rotating electromagnetic structure, produces an event horizon, which is an oblate spheroid. And I'm going, I don't even know whether I need to read anything more. Whoever this guy was, whether he's a fraud or not, he was tapping into the reality. And it might be a reality that was never executed. You understand? You can ask a question of a story of an event because the people making the original story, for whatever reason, got a download. And then they try and think about that, and they actually get the truth of how to deliver it, because all information and all science is eternal. You only haven't realized it yet. All knowledge is eternal. So they say here, the oblate spheroid shape extends 100 yards, more or less, out from each beam of the ship. That's the side of the ship. Any person within that sphere became vague in form. Now, the oblate spheroid shape, that is inside the apple. That is really where the space-time is changed. If I'm slightly outside, I'm actually still in the non-radiating boundary. If I'm outside the non-radiating boundary, light gets wrapped around and you see what's on the other side. So you have to be inside the non-radiating boundary when you're not turning to mush and being part of the ship. You go, and so you need to be on that boundary. And listen what he says here. Any person within that sphere, that's the apple, became vague in form, but he too observed the persons aboard that ship as though they were of the same state, yet walking upon nothing. Any person without that sphere could see nothing save the clearly defined shape of the ship's hull in the water, providing, of course, that the person was just close enough to see, yet just barely outside of that field. So there's that zone where you're in the non-radiating boundary. Outside that non-radiating boundary, it's invisible. It's invisible to all photons. That includes radar. And the light comes round from the other side, so, because that's what happens in a black hole. So I did the model, and we've got our South Korean destroyer over on the side, on the top right there. That's actually the ship, but I put it on its side. And, sorry, North Korean. Sorry, South Korea. My apologies. And in my modeling software, 1.41 meters, which is exactly the measured distance from the side of the ship to the outside of the oblate sphere, the apple, it represents 99.64 yards. The testimony is about 100 yards. Now, by being this big, you know that the actual length of ship is comfortably within the overall structure. So the testimony, whether it's true or not, is validated by the science. This has never been done before. So there's the ship, and there's the Kerr-Newman black hole on there, and then there is our apple shape over on the right, which is an oblate spheroid. That's maybe gives you a better idea of what's going on. I haven't actually got the apples in there so you can see it. Okay? And if you dial this up to the max, it will jump. Now I'm going to explain why I think that is. I almost certainly am about to say something that has been known or is known. Okay? But I haven't heard it. It doesn't mean it hasn't been said before, and it doesn't mean it's not wrong, but I'm going to say it anyway. If you listen to the testimony of Ken Shoulders in the interview conducted by Nancy Lazarian, the wife of John Hutchison, with John Hutchison in 2010, which I transcribed, he and Ashton shared part of that. He showed how we can teleport things through other matter. He also says in that what we are building is things like an electron. And he says, you know, there are these things called electrons, and then there's Cooper pairs, and then there's muons, which are like 274 times the mass, and a Cooper pair is 2 times the mass of an electron. Then there's tauons, which are like 3,700 times the mass. He says, we can build electronic structures that are billions of the mass of an electron. And he says, the funny thing is that we can change their charge. And we can change their charge all the way down to they are 1 negative charge. Now, an ordinary vacuum object is an electron and a proton, and 2 of those come together with another vacuum object, which is a nuclear neutrino, to form a composite particle, which is the neutron. Okay? So this is for the standard simple atomic model out there. Thank you. And so those are the ordinary vacuum objects. They breathe through their toroidal structure the relic neutrinos, which maintain in an atom the orbit at a particular centripetal de Broglie wave. Okay? That is how you have the maintenance of an apple. Now, the energy in all of the space there is due to the 0-point energy, or the parameter space of the space-time you're in. If you change the energy, the orbit will change its position, because the atom can only breathe up to a certain point to be in balance with its surroundings. Now, those things are in balance for all time, effectively. A proton, I think, is 10 to the 34 years or something like that, according to John Kramer's 1983 article. Something like that. You can go and fact check me on that, but there's Google for that. Right? By the way, if I get something wrong, it's the intention you need to hear. Right? So the thing is, what we're creating in these structures, which can be microns to millimeters and are also scale invariant, I've showed you, and I can show you, many examples of scales up on John Hutchison samples and on other structures. You make a exotic vacuum object. It's a fractal self-similar structure to the stable, permanently stable structures in our ordinary vacuum, but you're making an exotic vacuum object. And it's behaving exactly as an electron. Now, if it's only got a single charge, there's 2 things that are really important to you. If you've got a wave, which is like 2.45 gigahertz Wi-Fi, you can get that reception all the way around your house, right? Because it goes through the walls. It's not attenuated by the matter in there. There's 100% attenuation with the electrons in my feet and the chair and the stage that I'm on, which is good, otherwise I'll be going through there, right? Because why? Why? Anyone guess? They are the same type of thing. Now, if you have 5G Wi-Fi, it gets more attenuation by solid matter, okay? If you have 100%, it would get 100% reflected, right? That is the electrons in my body. Now, the ordinary electron is really, really small, right? The free electron. If you had an electron, and we've seen them in Hutchison samples that are 1.6 millimeters across, but if we made an electron that was the size of a ship, right, we can move that, and how does it represent itself? I'm going to give you this idea of, does anyone know what a pixel is? Yeah? What is it? It's an abbreviation of the words pixel element, right? Pixel. It's just a quantization, right? It's a unit of distance. Now, what is the smallest unit of distance we know in nature? Very good. Ordinary vacuum objects in the ordinary vacuum, if I'm moving across here, do I look like I'm going, do I? No, I look really smooth. I'm not going to moonwalk for you. But it's really smooth, and that's because every single ordinary vacuum object in my body is moving between all of those Planck positions. The wave function of every ordinary vacuum object in my body is collapsing at this Planck distance, and it's re-emerging here, and it's re-emerging here. But now, rather than an ordinary vacuum object, we've created a vacuum object which is an exotic vacuum object. And its wave function is vast. And it can carry matter inside it. And when when it tries to move in a direction, it can either exist here or here. That is the only options. And in the A.C. Holt paper that I shared with you, he says, this is in 1969, he went on to work for propulsion at NASA. He's saying that what we know from UFOs is sometimes they're there, and then they disappear, you cannot perceive them, and then they sometimes reappear over here. Now imagine if your frame of reference speed of light is bound to the quantization, that is the pixel density at the Planck distance, right? You can only move at the speed of light in this distance. But if your standing wave, the nodes at which you can exist and the wave function can collapse, is much further apart. Let's say I've got an electron now that's 200 yards across, right? When I make that reappear, the next place it can occur is a vast distance away. So when you start to move in a direction, you immediately either are here or you're back where you were. And when you kind of like a little bit unstable and you didn't quite make it over here and the wave function is trying to resolve itself, you actually flip back to where you were. That is how things, in my view, can travel through matter. Ball lightning, which is a known quantum or macro quantum object, which is a magnetohydrodynamic structure as that which I've described, can walk through glass. What is glass? It's a dielectric. It can also walk through the aluminium body of a plane and go down the aisle of a plane. What is that? That's a conductor. Why? It doesn't even see the matter. It's not a barrier to it at all, in any sense. It can only exist outside the plane, or it can exist inside the plane. In between, it's just a wave function. It's not a collapsed wave function. It's like, I can only see this atom or thing in my coherent matter when I measure it. And it's at the point of measure where the collapsed wave function appears. So for me, this is what I wanted to say. I don't know whether it's ever been said before. I expect it has, probably in Black World. But for me, this is how you teleport. Wormholes in the lab. This is Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto. It's on page 92 in his book, Steps to the Discovery of Electronuclear Collapse. If you haven't got the free version of this, you can download it from my blog at remoteview.icu. If you want to support the as yet not quite completed update version of it, and it's going to be absolute stonker, you can go to the Kickstarter for that, and I would very appreciate your support. He shows in his theory that the matter collapses to a point of electronuclear collapse. It then burps in an explosion of the black hole. You get a shock wave that goes out. It travels through a wormhole and reappears elsewhere. Not necessarily as the same matter, which is disturbing in his thinking. This is a physical captured representation of this process occurring in a Bin-Huang reactor. This is the fat Oreo, one of the wheels within the main apple shape, and the coherent matter that cohered at the phase singularity at the core here was denatured, and I'm going to explain with this poster over here how that occurs. And it goes through a wormhole and gets reborn as new matter in a beautiful crystal flower there. We can repeat this all day long. This is a physical example of a wormhole and matter appearing on the other side. In this case, it's not the same matter, but okay. It's the same information in a different order. We've done it on another sample I have here, which I call the cardioid infarction. And here is the structure. And that was on this metal plate here. You can have a look at this close up. We can look at it with a macro photography later. I've got a microscope here as well. And the matter flowed through, it fluidized. This is not turning it to molten. It's not thermally molten, but it fluidized it, went through a wormhole, exactly, but you can, under the SEM, you cannot see a hole. There's no hole. It produces a dome precisely in the same part of the structure as Tesla has in his promotional photo for the weapon to end all wars. And it comes out and splats down in exactly the magnetohydrodynamic structure on the right. That is an actual example, a physical example you'll all be able to hold in your hands of matter teleportation, the aftermath. There's our little Gorgon stair. We have a propulsion, 2.5 million miles per hour. This was said in 1958. You do the maths, that gets you to Mars in 21.21 hours at the oppositions. And you've got the best part of 4.18 years in a 10-year period to get there within 2 days, as claimed by Brilliant Light Power earlier in the week, last week, just under a week ago. It would do it with this system, which is A.C. Holt's proposal to NASA in 1979, which you can download. Again, UFOs are often observed to disappear instantaneously. In a subset of these cases, the UFO later reappears at a nearby location, implying a disappearance from and reappearance into space-time. If you did not understand what I said earlier, come to me and I'll help you get through that. Everything else that's been reported in Congress about UFOs is there in that 1979 document. I talked about this 1992 document from that was in the CIA archive from 2017, and it said that a system that is based on cold fusion can take 1 kilogram of iron, extract the hidden energy of matter within it, which I'm going to describe in a minute with the aid of my ICCF poster, and it can convert that into energy, and the system that does the extraction of the energy from that 1 kilogram of iron is the propulsion technology that allows you to get to Alpha Centauri from Earth in 6 years. You run the maths, 0 to 0.8 C, 8C cruise, 8C to 0. You need to accelerate and decelerate at 1.8 G. This is below that quoted by Brilliant Light Power to get to Mars in 2 days. And yeah, that's it. So yes, they were right in 1992. Eugene Podkletnov says his force produced hundreds of pounds. That's the exact quote, or very similar quote to what was said by Brilliant Light Power. And what he does is he creates coherent electrons on the yttrium, barium, copper oxide superconductor. That produces, as that is spinning around, that produces little vortices in there which actually have a topological monopole in, and that's the way the vortice is formed. So there's a whole bunch of topological monopoles in an array. Then he hits it with a high voltage pulse from a Marx generator. That causes all those fluidized electrons with their topological monopoles to come off and instantaneously organize into a fractal exotic vacuum object, which then hits the target and produces, on the way, it produces an impulse which travels, in his calculations, at 64 times the speed of light. The reason is, and we've shown this on video in our experiments, the beam that comes out is a high-frequency gravitational wave, and it's made of neutrino spin. That is the spin that comes, that is the spin of all matter, right? But in this case, you have a massive spin wave that comes out. That's the signal, and in that signal, it packs a punch of the order of hundreds of pounds. Exactly the same quoted for a microwave ball lightning earlier, within this week by Brilliant Light Power. Notice there is a coil around that is aligning the structures as they form. All of these systems have a coil to produce a homogeneous magnetic field. So this is their quote: to Mars in 2 days at 2G. And they say you can just use a piece of aluminium foil in your kitchen microwave. Don't do this at home, kids. Microwaves can actually be really dangerous. Yeah, so don't use a phone as well. Okay, so the proposal that I gave was based part on this classified document, or the series of documents that I got out of the Matsumoto archive just 2 weeks ago. And this was sent to Bill Clinton. It was sent to the director of correspondence of Al Gore. It was sent to all the national labs, NASA, the head of fusion technology, all of the major newspapers, and so on in 1995. I have the post-dated envelopes to show the proof of it, signed by the individuals involved. And read what it says: the resulting fusion energy swirls into a spherical ball that creates its own self-holding magnetohydrodynamic effect in a stable shape. This is called fusion-powered ball lightning. 1995. The patent was submitted to the US Patent Office on, as far as I can determine, on the 8th of the 2nd, 1995. This is an abbreviated version of the patent that was sent out to researchers around the world that was deemed to be okay to send out because the patent had been submitted. On the bottom right diagram, you can see not a very great version of magnetohydrodynamic structure, but that's what they're calling it, as a ball lightning. And you see the core, which is a little black circle in there. I'll go to the next slide. It's a little bit clearer on that. Yeah, on the bottom right of the left side. And they say that the fusion, which is aneutronic fusion, occurs in that core, which is exactly where it occurs. And we have the hard physical evidence, repeatable in multiple systems from multiple independent authors around the world, that that is where it occurs. They were right. And I have the proof that they classified this in 1996. We could have had, potentially, with the advancement and the correction of what they got wrong here and the fact that they got fluid in there and that's not necessary and so on, we could have had unlimited energy for nearly 30 years. All of those people that died to protect reserves. It's a bit sick, right? So you need a minimum of 6 structures here, okay? And that produces the flower of life. And as you can see in physical experiments, both in the Henk plasma experiment, which is on that image on the top right there, is imaged with an SEM on the boundary within 1 micron of the area. Because what happens is, whilst there's no electromagnetic waves that come out, there is a toroidal moment that comes out, and the self-similar structures can feel that, and they are attracted to it. So they form a fuzzy ball around the outside. So when Leonid Uritsky produced a ball lightning, a macro ball lightning, by exploding titanium foil in water with a couple of hundred joules, he produced a ball lightning, and a few microseconds later, it produced thousands of little micro ball lightnings. So he produced a macro one, and it decays into that. So it's made up of many micro ball lightnings. And you can see the magnetohydrodynamic structure on the left there in a 2D planar form. With 6, you get a perfect circle hole in the center. 3 is all you need. Actually, 2 is all you need, but with 3, you can define a plane. So if you wanted to move something in the center through the azimuth, it's easier to define a plane with 3 points. It's really, really hard to define a plane with 2 points. Okay. And then the bottom right there is in the inside of the outside section of the Malcolm Bendel's thunderstorm generator that ran for 500 hours. Those are carbon hexagons or pentagons, but mostly hexagons, which are equidistantly spaced, right? And that's because of the sound waves that are allowing for the coherence. And then in the core of those, you have iron-rich crenellated spheres, which is what forms, because of the magnetic monopole. If there isn't iron to grab in there, it'll make it. Now, I want you to see what Ken Shoulders says in his 2004 document here, large-scale propulsion using EVOs. I didn't read this the other day, but this is critical. A propulsion method based on the use of exotic vacuum objects is proposed that potentially capable of passive and controlled lifting of many tons of material against the gravitational field per ounce of apparatus used. Many tons with a piece of apparatus that weighs ounce. His next sentence is this: the underlying technology, the containment of electrons in fluid form, is also the root process for the very economical generation of electrical power. It is the same thing. So the need to cover this up, which was probably discovered in those classified documents that were in the ball lightning study, under the classification terms of space and aerospace, not only gives you a propulsion technology that works at any point in the universe, it also gives you unlimited energy, as was defined by the 1992, formerly classified until 2017, Russian paper. We've all been living a lie. That's Ken Shoulders with his lovely smile there. And that's one of his first images, figure 1. Actually, it is his first image in his main patent. Okay? The structure on the left is the basic thing that he could determine as a core EVO, and that is about 1 micron across. That's going to be very critical when we hold up this poster. We're coming to that. So he says, on 6 sides of the dielectric container, dielectric because that will contain ball lightning. Chukhanov found this. We found this in our supernova reactors and so on. you have 6. And why do you use 6? Well, I've shown you physically from that sample why you have 6. Because it produces, well, in fact, just to go back, the torsion goes into the apple of the one on around the loop. So all of the actual point of destruction, it then forms a closed loop. So energy goes in, isn't lost. It coheres and it produces an increasing amount of energy in that loop from physical experimentation. So I talked about how to make a power drive core, that is unlimited power and extreme ridiculous amounts of power, propulsion at any point. Fused quartz sphere, I've given the list of the people there. There's many I could have used. Between 1 and 4 millimeter internal diameter. You need 1 millimeter, and we know this to be true because of this sample by my friend and researcher Henk Uren. That is a magnetic fluid, okay, that produced what looks like wormwood in wood. There was 2 metal plates above that. I can describe this in detail later, how this was formed. I've got great imagery that I took last year that you can look at on video. But the channels in here are all just around 1 millimeter. Why? When you run the maths in an electron ion plasma, you need around about 1 millimeter to produce the initiation magnetic strength, or in the magnetohydrodynamics of the fluidized electrons, of 10 to the 15 Tesla. You need it to be that size. The answer is there. What is the question? So I had the answer a good number of years ago. Nature is saying, this is the answer. Go ahead and find the question, right? And when you get that, and you form the magnetohydrodynamic structure, and it builds the magnetic strength, and it's only at that scale that it can reach 10 to the 15 Tesla. Now, as it starts pulling in nuclei, and the nucleon density goes up, the requirement for what I'm about to say next drops. And it can go down to 10 to the 11 Tesla. But it may never need to do that, because as soon as it gets to 10 to the 15 Tesla, the baryons start losing their identity, and the quarks in there start falling apart. And as it falls apart, and I'll give you more detail in a second, to cut a long story short, it produces a magnetohydrodynamic structure out of quarks gluon. It's called a quark-gluon plasma. And when it's in that state, it only needs to be under a micron, as is in 1992 patent of Ken Shoulders. And in 2010, he said that S.V. Adamenko's work in Ukraine, which is now classified and part of the fusion program, because they brought the whole lab over from outside Kiev, which had 20,000 consecutive experiments that produced every element in the periodic table. It was funded by Kolomoisky and the other guy that ran Privat Bank, and that's probably why you're going to have to make them in jail, isn't it, right? You can't have them knowing about this. And they did. They funded it. They had something like 100 scientists work for 6 years. It's the biggest research program, I think, since the Manhattan Project, and the benefit went to Brookhaven National Laboratory, and as far as I know, it's now classified. Okay? But he said in 2010 that what was being observed by S.V. Adamenko was a quark soup, which is a euphemism for a quark-gluon plasma. I didn't know until I ran the maths that a quark-gluon plasma can produce the required field to self-feed itself at 1 micron, which is the scale that he has in his patent in 1992. Ken Shoulders said an exotic vacuum object is the same thing that is going on in S.V. Adamenko's work, and it is the same thing as is going on in the Hutchison effect. I have samples of the Hutchison effect you can see today. Okay? So these all are correlated. Now, the interesting thing is if you have an electron ion plasma, that will decay very, very quickly. And in fact, it's extremely small amounts of time after a nuclear bomb is detonated that all of those ions recombine. And yet, in 2019, at the Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute, using a water flow plasma discharge with a 200-volt bias and 2,000-volt pulses, they produced long-lived glowing objects, monopoles with strands between them, and they also produced these glowing tori that they video recorded moving around on a sheet of metal for 2 days. An electron ion plasma cannot possibly exist as a glowing object for 2 days on a piece of metal in standard temperature and pressure. Not possible. But you know what can? A quark-gluon plasma. because it is the most superfluid thing known to mainstream physics. For them to deny what I'm telling you today, they have to say the Big Bang never happened, and what we observe in CERN as our pinnacle of pinnacled observations is not true. I've got them by the short of curlies, and I'm holding them tight now. So we ultimately create something that can exist without any extra input or source of energy for around about 2 days before it kind of decoheres. When Leonid Oritskev was exploding that metal wire in water, creating that ball lightning, he also had 0.7 meters away a iron 57 sheet, and then another one, 90 degrees, iron 57 sheet. A normal magnet on the back with north on it, a normal magnet with south on it. Then he had a control piece of iron 57 sheet in another room. He then did his explosion, and then he took those magnetic sheets and put them under an NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance. And he saw a shift one way on one sheet, a shift the other way on the other sheet, and the other control sample was in the middle. And you know what? That decayed after 2 days. Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto, when he was doing water discharges, he produced these little ball lightning structures that would travel through the water, they would come through the glass, they would leave their marks on an X-ray film. They had basically expressed no charge. They had been able to go through. But they still had a magnetic component, and he showed this by having an iron rod, and he caught some of these toroidal structures on the iron rod. And cleverly, he didn't wait for 7 weeks before he got enough money to pay for an SEM to look at them like we've had to do for decades. Right? What he did was he go, oh, I've got an SEM, let's put it in there. And what he found was these things decayed from a torus to a hexagonal plate over 2 days. I could go on and on. There's many, many examples in the low-energy nuclear reaction field. This means there has to be a structure that is able to produce the confinement in a magnetohydrodynamic sense in normal standard temperature and pressure for a minimum of 2 days. And the only way that that is possible is if you have a quark-gluon plasma. It's a different phase of matter. There are more than 4 phases of matter. At least this is the 5th. It has a higher binding energy than all ordinary forms of matter. And so it does novel nuclear reactions, and we're about to come to that. So the very specific things that you need are homogeneous magnetic field. I've just listed some of the people, including the classified Cooley-Bennett work. Sprinkle of lithium aluminium deuteride used in the 1990s. We have a sample of it from Pons and Fleischmann in their cold fusion research. A sprinkle of carbon-60, that is what is referenced by Cooley and Bennett in their classified patent, which we don't have access to, we just have the abstract. We've done it, Eagle's done it, and Klimov recently announced that for more than 2 decades they've been using carbon as their fuel in their plasma vortex reactors. Okay? 0 to 600 phased high DIDT discharges, high current pulses in a short amount of time. Many people have talked about this. The 0 to 600 hertz specifically comes from Air Force research, and it was a pulse, it was a shoulders type pulse, and it was only that produced, from a small electrode to a big electrode, that produced a vertical lift on their test apparatus. Then they stopped talking about it. They said, oh, it kind of worked, but that's it, right? So, and then you have stimulation to keep the thing energized rather than letting it die after 2 days of electromagnetics or sound stimulation. But when you have a system, and I can go into the details about the AOV, but when you've got it spun up and you've got a little ball of quark-gluon plasma in the central column of your ARV, it will cause the flux of chi such that it will float off the ground without any energy input for how much time? 2 days. You're getting it. I like it. So you can have those things in that Lockheed Martin warehouse in that Air Force base, which are floating off the ground. And they float off the ground exactly and precisely at the same point that Tesla cut off his Holy Grail Vesica Pisces section. Exactly in the place that you can see on this physical example you will be able to hold in your hands. That little nipple there is exactly that part which the ARV will produce this continuous field that's sufficient to push the Earth away, but not fall down and not fly up into the sky when it's in a stable state for 2 days. Then 6 tungsten electrodes. Okay. I'd done the teleportation, and I talked about this. I showed that basically if you want to live on Earth and you're actually traveling at the 1/10 the speed of light that was found in 1985, it was mentioned in one of the documents I got from the Matsumoto archive by John Bockris, the world's greatest electrochemist. That is what you get from the Adamenko dielectric battery discharge that did those 20,000 experiments in a row, and that's the 1/10 the speed of light that you can easily achieve in the patents of Ken Shoulders, right? When you break that dielectric discharge, when you have that dielectric barrier discharge, it produces an EVO. And even with a bias of about 200 volts, which is what I said was in that plasma flow water discharge of Bogdanovich at Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute, it launches out at 1/10 the speed of light with just a 200 volt bias. So how much time does that take you to get to any point on Earth? No slower than 2 blinks. And because it is a macro electron, if you're sitting in that structure, you do not feel charge, so you can go through the Earth, and you do not feel inertia, so you don't feel the acceleration and the deceleration. So I'm going to go on to a little bit crazy. So, and you're going to get this. So this was a little bit crazy one, and I showed that the symbol of God-controlled power on the Samshad Adad stele from nearly 3,000 years ago exactly fits the 4-order swastika structure, which according to the Italian so-called solar cult is how the sun works, and I believe that's exactly how it does work. And it fits within a 4 subtor structure. And then I showed how this explains the Zeta-Rota square, or the Rota-Zeta square, and that is the divine creator from alpha repeatedly to omega comprehends and works with whirlwinds. The whirlwinds are the tornadoes. And later this year, I will do a little bit of Crazy 3, but I'm going to show you a quick brief overview, a little bit of Crazy 2. I will talk about who actually, I think, wrote this document and why, and anyway. So this is a spiral pattern, which is talking about the beginning and end of life, and this is from a 5,400-year-old temple in Malta. This is one of the oldest temples on Earth. Now, they think it's 5,400 because when they excavated them in the turn of the 1900s, I think this is 1916, this particular one, they took the carbon dating from the kind of floor level. But now people are saying, I think we should lift up some of the stones that were never found fallen over or whatever, and we should see what the carbon dating is under there. And there's now speculation this could be as old or older than Göbekli Tepe. So order. That is the Hakakim, Menadra temples, 3,600 BC, 5,600 years old. Look at the one on the right. It's exactly the magneto-hydrodynamic structure. That is the oldest of the old temples in Malta, where the Knights Hospitalier ended up. Okay? And it has these 2 structures that you see where I've got the left-right comes down on the golden ratio line. That is the side patterns. When I first walked into this temple, there was a vortex of stuff going on the left. And I just walked out and I said to my wife, I said, beep, this is an energy structure. I said, this is a beep energy structure. I said, set up the camera there. So I walked back in, and I thought, no one could have imagined this, I'm sure. And I thought, no, someone said it before. And surely, I went back online, and there was some guy in 1920 that says this is an energy structure. Never underestimate how late you are to the party. This is the 5,400-year-old temple, and you see on the right, the magneto-hydrodynamic structure of the 10-second experiment with Roy Shinamasa in 2019. And I don't know if you can see that vortical coherent matter wave beam that's coming out of the substructure as it collapsed, which I've highlighted in the center bottom. Okay, it's like a twisted beam. It always comes out between the golden ratio line and inside the Vesica Pisces. Okay, in the temple here, which is like the second oldest one that's there, you can see that they put on that golden ratio line in that. That's an amplifier of chi. That's a chi amplifier, and then it goes through the vortex and the anti-vortex spiral. That's the threshold into the back sanctum. And then it goes through, on the left and right side, it has a 4-tor and an anti-4-tor, or rotated 90 degrees. This shows that there was implicit understanding of how reality and nature works at least 5,400 years ago. Now, maybe 12, 13, or whatever. I don't know, because it's a fundamental fact of nature. It is eternal. So I don't know when these people came to Earth or when they worked this out, but they knew. And up the top is the Holy of Holies. What do I mean by that? Oh, I haven't got it there, have I? Basically, it's exactly the same structure as the Christian church. It's exactly the same structure as the Great Pyramid of Egypt. They are exactly and precisely the same as what you are seeing here. It's the way the energy coheres. At the top of the caduceus, you have that iron-rich crenellated sphere that's blown itself off and come round to the right because it's twisting that way in this case. And you have a subcore, the N-1 core, and that's coming out between the golden ratio line and the Vesica Pisces. This is how these structures break up. So chaos. This is an example of chaos. It's called a Kármán vortex street. It's in the Azores, Cape Verde, Cape Verde. And it's a high mountain, and as the clouds go over, it produces that Kármán street vortex. This is in the Hal Puthoff temple, 3,400 BC. Now, Valletta, what people do when they come and invade a place or they take it over, they build their most sacred structures on the old most sacred structures, right? And Valletta is this huge city fort with deep ports either side. Hal Puthoff is just outside of that major city fort and was found in 1916, I think, it's sometime around there. So when you see what you see in Valletta, you see all this symbology everywhere, absolutely everywhere. Do you think they didn't find an old temple and choose to build on that? I think they probably did, and they kept that up their sleeve. Now, this doesn't really fit it, but this does. This is from the 3rd century BC. From Attica, which is the southeastern part of mainland Greece. And you can see exactly the same type of structure as is on that Hal Puthoff temple. Now, all in that first part of that temple that I showed you, the amplifier, the condenser, there are all of these turbulence symbols. When you step across the vortex and the anti-vortex threshold through the quad vortices, which are rotated 90 degrees, you don't see any of the turbulence symbols. It's freaking amazing the level of detail that they went to encode this information. So, I'm going to talk about the jewel. My father was a Mason, so we're going to talk about the Masonic jewel, the 33rd jewel here. And this was formalized with the establishment of the first Supreme Council in Charleston, South Carolina, a little bit south of here, in May the 31st, 1801. So, this is the jewel. It says, Order ab Chaos, order from chaos. Deus memque Deus, which means God and my right. Yes, a Mason believes we can create order out of chaos, and it's not only God's right, it's man's right. And that's what happens. A woman says, go out and smash some stuff up and bring it home so I can feed the children, right? And if you want any more children, you have to go out and get some more stuff. So the woman is the ultimate destroyer. They force the men to go out and fight and bring stuff home so that they can create life. The life is created, order, out of chaos. It is yin and yang. We are in yin. I gave my first presentation in yang. All balance. Sapienta, wisdom. Now, what do you see in the background there? That is the Teutonic cross. But in the center, you see the eagle. The eagle, the first mythological version of the eagle is Zeus, the bearer of the thunderbolt, the ball lightning. He came to Earth and he sought its center. And so what he did, he released 2 eagles that went to opposite ends, from opposite ends of the Earth. They soared and they met above Delphi. And then that marked the sacred spot, the center of the Earth. And so that's where all the ancient peoples from all of these regions we've been talking about over the last couple of days came to learn when to plant their crops, when to go to war, and all of that. It is a symbol of America, of course. Just the single eagle, but anyway. They called the eagle as landed in July the 20th, 1969. And the Eagle Transitron, and this is a personal story for me, when I was a kid, the only Airfix model I wanted to build every week, was the Eagle Lander. And that was from Space 99. And it was developed in the early 1970s by Jerry and Sylvia Alveston. And actually the Transitron was an ability for it to go faster than light and to basically teleport. And that's how it went interstellar and through different planets. But it was a basic little utilitarian craft. So here is on the 32nd joule. On the right, you have a Byzantine. You can see at the top of the wings, you have a vortex and an anti-vortex, and the cone structure going into the center. It's represented that. And then down the bottom, you've got the Hittites. And then there's the cross, basically, of the 32nd joule. That was the joule that existed for all Masonic time until the Americans came up with the 33rd. Right? This is the 33rd joule by the Scottish Rites. So it is the Jerusalem cross. What is that? That's a 4-order structure made of 4-order structures. It's a symbol of Jerusalem. It normally has Christ at the center. That is the Christ center. Then on the right, you see that it gives you wings. But what is the translation there? Well, the 33rd joule in detail. I've shown you one symbol. We got the chaos. The chaos is exactly represented on the Scottish Rites. And the magnetohydrodynamic vortex that produces the order from the chaos is there pulling that chaos in from both sides. Exactly and precisely as represented in the Hal Puthoff temple from 5,400 years ago. There it is. That is our 33rd joule. And it says, Laus Deus Custos and Carni, which means, praise be to God, keeper of the secret. Spes mea in Deo est, my hope is in God. Thank you very much. And now I will go to the poster. Hold your applause. Before I do this, I want to say something that blew my mind. I didn't remember what Ken Shoulders had written in 2004. I'm pretty sure I'd skim-read it at some point. I've got a photographic memory, so maybe I had it in my head. Certainly, it's not a new idea. I had absolutely not got the documents that pointed to the classification of the Warren Cooley and Chuck, whatever his name is. Chuck, sorry, I can't remember. Sorry, Chuck. But anyway, I hadn't got that. But I met someone in Europe, a different place in Europe to where I live, at the end of last year. And I described to him a dielectric container with 6 electrodes with basically the fuel that I've described there. And I said, this is how I envisage an unlimited power generation system, and this would produce propulsion. And I said, this is the ancient technology, the things that I've showed you here today. This is our experiments showing that you have to have 6 to make the perfect stability. It's in the flower of life, right? It's in the ancient symbology. But here it is, in the 33rd joule. My father was a Mason. He showed me these orbs in 1979, okay? This has to be a real technology which would provide unlimited energy and propulsion, work anywhere, and I know the Masons must know it at some level. And do you know what he did? You know what he did? He pulled out of his right pocket a diagram of what I described. And out of his fucking left pocket, he pulled out his Masonic ring. That was the biggest head screw of my life. That's the first time I've shared it in public, so deal with it. Sorry for my bad language. Right, so I'm going to talk about how this works, and then we can go to the Q&A session. Is Ashton in the house? Not in the house, but anyway. And we can do the practical demonstrations. Okay, so how's your arm? Good. Good for half an hour? Okay, so this is our magnetohydrodynamic structure. And essentially, you've got to imagine this in 3 dimensions that I've told you about. But essentially, what you do is you get a Kerr-Newman black hole forming in here, or something similar to that. And what that does is it starts dragging the medium over which light transports. Now, according to Alexander Shishkin, he says the things that are being observed by Dr. Alexander Parkhomov are actually what you call weakly interactive massive particles. These are, there's various things that are being called, like an axion, which is a cluster of electron neutrinos, these kind of things which they don't think they found, but they might exist. But anyway, something is doing weak interactions, and therefore it's likely to be some form of neutrinos or clusters thereof. Now, the relic neutrinos themselves, the elementary LC dipoles, they are the quintessence, they are the ether. They are superfluid. I described that earlier. The clusters thereof are fractal toroidal clusters of these things that end up with a fractal toroidal moment. They are gel-like, and this is compliant with the Einsteinian understanding of the medium through which light travels. And basically, you vibrate that, and that's the light wave, is the vibration in the gel medium that's made of fractal clusters of relic neutrinos. Okay? In an experiment by Shishkin in cavitation, he produced these condensed clusters that left birdies on X-rays, right? But after a while, it stopped producing them. He then had to move the cavitation device to another part of his lab, and immediately it started producing them again. Same with Dr. Alexander Parkhomov. A woodpecker bucking current produced these strange radiation, didn't work after a period of time, right? And Anatoly Klimov, in his vortex, plasma vortex reactor, similar technology is being developed by Engate. He found that when he ran that, an actual gamma producing source with a detector stopped detecting the same high level of gamma for how long? 2 days. Well done. Freaking amazing, right? Do you getting a pattern here? So what is happening is this torsion structure, and we have a torsion field detector down here, and we're going to have a play with that in a little while and see if it does stuff. And I haven't actually detected on these kind of devices, so you're going to see the same thing as I see for the first time. It may or may not work, but it's a bit of fun, right? So we're going to do the experiments together. So the torsion field and the toroidal moment is able to pull in the relic neutrino superfluid, but it's also able to pull in the gel clusters. And the gel clusters, because they are the thing over which light travels, it starts pulling the photons into the core where they can't go anywhere. And when that gets to a certain frequency, you start to do what's called vacuum energy depletion. So there's less photonic pressure here than there is down here. And so you have a net vector up the arse of these structures. The structure itself pushes this same material left and right. It is the Ukon Vasara, this symbol here, which unfortunately Elon Musk ripped off the 1600-year-old brass version of from the Helsinki Museum to make the Tesla logo, complete with the notch and the double line, which is on the same thing, and the curves where it goes into the golden ratio line. Just a complete rip-off. You can use that on any T-shirt, I'm pretty sure, because it's just a theft, right? But, and as is the name Tesla. But, so anyway, this produces the torsion field going in there, and so what happens is then, the first thing that happens is van der Waals forces fall apart, and they are about the strength of 0.1 to 10 kilojoules per mole. The second thing that happens are hydrogen bonding. What is that? That is the water in the subterranean chamber being separated into water gas without thermally doing it. Why? Because the weak hydrogen bond is over-energized by the chi flux that has to go from the high pressure to the low pressure. It's over-energizing it. Where you see this before? Go and look at these modern images of tornadoes going over buildings. You see a bit of dry wall, gypsum wall being lifted up. It goes in the air. And what's happened is, as the tornado went over, it pulled a load of chi, the clusters of relic neutrinos, through. It over-energized the weak hydrogen bonding in the gypsum, right? And as it's going through the air, you see, without anything impacting it, without really any pressure differential, you see the gypsum falling apart into fine dust. Why? Because it's over-excited. That person that went, I can't remember the so-called whistleblower, that said he went over and picked a thing up with a helicopter that was in a box, and he felt the god, what's his name? Jake Barber, yeah. So Jake, what happened to you was this. You felt that you were connected to God because a flux of chi came through and it connected you to source at a much more intense level. That's why you felt like that. That's what made you cry, right? The second thing that happened to you is your flesh fell off your body. Why? Because all of the water on there, it penetrates at a certain depth, it's partial reflection, but it overexcited the water in your skin, and it caused it to just turn and fall off. Completely explainable without modifying the understanding one iota. So this is how you can make more water gas, because the next thing that starts failing is metallic bonds. That is the Hutchison effect, and I've got some samples down there. Metallic bonds are only 100 to 500 kilojoules per mole. So that's the next thing when you over-energize with the monopoles, which Tom Bearden said. I phoned up John, I said, I think you're producing monopoles in there. He says, oh, that's funny, that's just what Tom Bearden said. I go, damn you, Tom Bearden. And so it over-energizes the weak metallic bonds. And a metal is actually kind of like a solid plasma. There's these electrons that go around. Now, if you change the behavior of the electrons, you change how they can interact with the metal nuclei that are arranged in the metal lattice, then it starts to turn to a non-thermal fluid. If you really excite it, it starts to glow. But it's not hot glow, it's just overexcited, trying to release that energy from the electrons that are having a de Broglie wave that's at a higher centripetal matter wave orbit from the nuclei. It's expelling that energy into the ether and exciting the surrounding air at the time that it's doing that. Okay, so then the next thing that you happen is ionic bonds. This is Shoulders EVOs boring through alumina and then depositing a fluidized layer of alumina under beeswax. Alumina normally melts at 20,070 degrees centigrade. Beeswax, not so much, about 60 degrees. I think 57 something degrees, right? Canuba wax, yeah? That is obviously not thermalization. It's changing the electron properties of the ceramic which it's passing through. And then you have, and he did it with glass as well, okay? And then you have beta isotope stability. That's the next thing that starts to fall apart. Now, a beta isotope is unstable. We know that because it's a beta isotope. Now, is a stable isotope or a beta isotope more likely to fall apart when you over-energize it? It's going to be the beta isotope. The weaker thing that you bash is going to fall apart more easily. Then the next thing up is alpha isotope. This is why it's very hard to use this process to do alpha isotope stability remediation, but it will do it. And then it goes on to nuclear cluster decay. Now, some people think that the binding energy of matter is the same for every nucleon. You have this phrase called binding energy per nucleon, and you have this chart where the helium-4 is up here, and then it goes down like that, and it goes up here, and right at the top you've got iron-56, there's a little bit down, and then there's nickel-62, and then it goes right down, per nucleon. But it isn't per nucleon. You don't take the total binding energy, you divide it by the number of neutrons and protons in there. That's utter nonsense, because it isn't just a ball of nucleons equally dividing that binding energy. And the simplest way I can describe this is with an element isotope called beryllium-8. It forms beryllium-8, and this is in the first fusion-fission reaction that was ever done by Cockcroft and Walton to prove Einstein's theory and the fact that they could split the atom. They took a proton, they used a Cockcroft-Walton voltage multiplier to accelerate it, and they hit it into lithium-7. That made beryllium-8, and 8 microseconds later, that decays into what? 2 alphas. Why? Yeah, but why? Why does it go to 2 alphas? It is held together for 8 microseconds, which in nuclear sense is eternity. It's literally eternity, according to the atoms. Yes. And what did I show? I showed, if you are following my thing here, the alpha particle is the first high binding energy peak, and then it comes down, and then it goes up, right? So the 2 alpha particles have more binding energy than the beryllium-8 that's formed. And so there is a bond in there that is more able to be affected by the gradient here. Okay? And that's true of all elements. So when we see what I showed you earlier, it's not on here, but the tungsten being torn apart into all of the elements, that is not fusion, it is not fission, it's cluster decay. It's totally not talked about ever. But this is a new understanding of what everyone sees in all cold fusion experiments ever. They all see like palladium and they see all these other elements, and they're not fusion, that's not fission. Is it fusion, fission? What is going on here? No, it's just going and falling apart. It's like when you get a bottle of Coke, and you've got a bit of pressure at the top, which is equalized the pressure of the gas that's dissolved in your Coke, and you go tss, like that, and then you see the bubbles coming up. You've depressurized the thing that's containing all of that gas within that fluid. It's like that fish at the bottom of the ocean that can live its whole life, it can have babies and get jiggy, it can eat things and whatever, right? But then you bring it up from the bottom of the ocean, you put it in your dish, and it goes, turns into a bunch of mush. because you've depressurized the environment in which it lives in. Our ordinary vacuum, you're changing the vacuum pressure, and you are causing matter to fall apart. Now, as that happens and it goes into the magnetic core, the magnetic strength goes up and up and up until you get what's called color disconfinement of baryons. This is in S.V. Adamenko's 2006 757-page book, which you can buy for a reasonable sum of $159 in digital form. And what happens then is, as you try to disconfine those baryons, when you pull that quark out, you need a flux of vacuum energy to recreate an antiquark. And this forms a meson. Okay? So you get gifted a whole other subatomic particle from the flux of ether energy. And when this overall structure decays, those mesons, and I'll talk about the intermediary step, those mesons will decay into three things: electrons, photons, and neutrinos. So you convert bogies, shit, waste, anything you want is fuel, as long as it's got condensed matter, which can be a plasma, a gas, a fluid, or a solid. Those are all considered condensed matter. Okay? Might not think it, but they are. And you can take any of the baryons in that and you convert it into light and leptons. Leptons being charged and uncharged, charged being an electron, and the uncharged being the neutrino. Some of the energy is lost to the neutrino. Doesn't matter, it's a nuclear neutrino. It's not going to affect anyone. It's going to go away, and it's going to be some point on the other side of the solar system very quickly. Right? We're not caring about that. You can literally produce unlimited electricity and unlimited matter, unlimited photons from this, and you change the things that you get out by stressing it with the magnetic field, as in the Tukhonov paper, okay, by breaking the coherence. Now, when it's in there, when you make the gluons, and the quarks and the matter separates, this is like a model of the quark-gluon structure, that falls apart and it produces a magnetohydrodynamic vortex, which is not 1 millimeter roughly across, as is proven by this sample, and we've replicated that. It is a micron across, and that does the magic. And so matter goes in, and then it gets born when these structures collapse as stellar synthesis. This is, here, an apple, and it sucked a slug of pure copper out of the copper pipe. And it did that just before it died, so you can literally see what it did. But that was copper that was going to become part of the Borg in the core, right? And when it dies, the matter spews out, as I showed on this substructure, but there's other ones here where you've just got, this is a little circle here, 20 microns, and this huge plume of stellar synthesis material is coming out when the overall magnetohydrodynamic structure decoheres the matter that's in the core, and it comes out as born as new elements. We are at the verge of an age of abundance. We are at the verge of an age of unlimited energy and free transport. And the question is, do you want to make it happen? Thank you very much for your time, and I'll take some questions. Any questions? Okay.
Can you discuss a little bit the relationship between epsilon naught and vacuum depressurization, and where in the fractal moment those permittivity changes are taking place in both aperture and a non-radiating boundary?
So within the whole bubble, you're changing your space-time. Your space-time is based on your vacuum parameters. The one that is key, which in Ken Shoulders, he calls it permittivity transitions. You can go and look at that paper. Really, it's the permittivity of the vacuum, the dielectric constant of the vacuum, that is epsilon 0. When you modify that, because of the way the speed of light and mass equation has occurred in time, but basically changes the rate of time, and it changes the the electron dielectric constant. So electrons stop behaving in the way that they ordinarily do. The specific arrangements, I would say at the top, which is the spin inversion on a topological monopole by the Yukon Vasara, that is where you are causing matter to move aside almost without any friction whatsoever. And that's how an exotic vacuum object bores through. It pulls that round, and because you are moving the structure of the ether away, you create a lower pressure of the ether in front, And because it comes round, it automatically creates a higher pressure behind. You can see this in hydrodynamics as well as magnetohydrodynamics. And it does it so beautifully that even if you haven't got any fuel, when you've got the structure spun up sufficiently, enough of that will come all the way round. It is the warp drive, but some balance of that will be sucked into the tornado and feed the process to move faster. And you may have heard this phrase with regard to anti-gravity craft: the faster they go, the faster they can go. Because the more they can scramjet into the ether, effectively, and capture that rarefied material and convert that into the action of the magnetohydrodynamic vortex. And so it is an arrangement that leads to basically a speed of light difference and parameter of the space-time different from the front to the back, which then it just pushes itself forward, and it's driven by the actual magnetohydrodynamics.
Similar to the asymmetrical capacitor electrostatic thrusters.
That's kind of what it was doing, but it's a really bad way of doing it. Yeah.
This is the proper way.
This is the way to do it, and I believe it was covered up in the early 1950s, if not 1950. And I think that's why they brought in this is when Andresen was visiting the I think you had someone that was in the White House and they were signing stuff or whatever it was. I don't know. But you had a president in the last round, apparently, and he and they visited him and they said, we classified a whole field of science in the 1950s, and no one's been talking about that. We did a good job on that, so don't expect we can do that again if we need to. And I think this was it. Because what Bostic is showing is a Tor of Tors. It's a fractal toroidal structure, but he never says it. He shows a torus coming in from one side and another torus coming into a magnetic field to form a Tor of Tors, right? Then he draws what he sees under the camera, the pinhole camera. He says that is actually a braided twist with a loop on the end and a braided twist with a loop on the end. And this is like surreal. He's got two consecutive arguments, but he gives himself a get out. He says, this is just an idea and a hypothesis on each one. So he's not revealing the Tor of Tors. So you don't get into that fractal geometry. You can see when they started talking about that in 1956, they were already engineering the message. Yeah. Yeah, sure, man.
So one thing I want to bring up too is that when did they figure this out? You know, I did a whole thing just earlier about the history of the scientific papers on zero-point energy, and there's a good understanding of it going back to the 80s at least. But I think it was actually Tucker Carlson on Joe Rogan a couple years ago that broached this idea of there being some connection to the UFO phenomenon going back to the Manhattan Project. And if you research the physicists, you find people like Richard Feynman and John Archibald Wheeler who were connected to the Manhattan Project. In fact, John Archibald Wheeler, he was the guy that designed the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment I was talking about earlier about retrocausality. And he's also the guy who worked on the hydrogen bomb. So if we connect the concepts that we learned about today, we learned that to manipulate zero-point energy, we might want to electrify the vacuum or create a powerful electromagnetic pulse. Well, that's very similar to what they were trying to do with like the hydrogen bomb, for example. So I could see a scenario in which they had discovered this property of the universe, space not being empty, zero-point energy, the ether, when they were working on the atom bomb, when they were testing it out. They saw effects that were probably anomalous.
You literally see a magnetohydrodynamic structure going on.
Exactly.
And moreover, what you've just said there, polarizing the vacuum, that's exactly what the ARV does. It has this, someone can correct me, it's something like Herkimer quartz, but it's a certain type of quartz which is naturally occurring, but you can also grow it in labs. And it has the highest dielectric constant of anything naturally occurring. And if you look at the claimed distance of the amount of quartz between the electrodes in the ARV, it's sufficient when you run the mass to produce 1.1 million volts. And you only need 1.022 million volts to polarize the vacuum. Why is that important? Because in space, you can't just create a plasma out of your atmosphere because you don't have an atmosphere. You need to create positrons and electrons from the vacuum fluctuations and do charge separation, synthesize those things, and they are your charge separated material that then you move with the 48 plates around and the 8 plates up to move it that way and to move it. Well, actually, you could split it into 16 of 3, and then it goes sections, so you can make a Tor of Tors in that way.
Question in the back? exploding wires to trigger the bombs. Yeah, wow, that's interesting. Yeah, so very similar to that. So, yeah, I think there's definitely a connection there, and I think, you know, not to get political, people are upset with my political opinions on the internet right now, is that when people are talking about when we're preventing other countries from getting nukes, I mean, that was 1945 technology that we're talking about. So I think we have to be thinking a little bit more advanced than that. Are we really afraid of, you know, Iran or North Korea getting a nuclear weapon that we had in 1945? We've had 80 years to figure out countermeasures for that. I think we're probably looking at something more dangerous. And if you look at this nuclear technology potentially being connected to zero-point energy technology. Again, John Kramer is an experimental nuclear physicist, and he's doing experiments about wormholes. You know, what's the connection there? I would say that we have to look at the reality of the dangers of what this kind of weaponry can produce.
I can talk about the actual energy density. So like in Ken Shoulders, he says like 1 cc of fluidized electrons can take out like several cubic meters of anything. There's nothing that can hold it back. And so he says you mustn't use triggers over 2 kilo electron volts, right? So that's why I put that in there. Why? Because that is the threshold at which you blow up the coherence, right? So if you're doing this at home, make sure that your system that does the triggering doesn't go over, or energizing does not go over 2 kilo electron volts. And if you want to do that, make sure you're in a different building.
Yeah,
okay?
We don't endorse any bomb making of any type.
And also what I said was, it's kind of like, he says ounces of material can lift several tons. Now, I have a photo given to me by Yin Gazda of this book by Takaaki Matsumoto in the hands of David Adair. Does anyone know who he is? What's the story? So here's a description. I was told that he produced an object, and when he was 17 years old or something, and he's an old man now, sorry David, and he went to White Sands Missile Test Range. At that time, there were still former Nazis there helping out. And he triggered this thing, and as soon as it spun up, it literally disappeared from view. I mean, it was there, and then it wasn't. But on radar, they could see that it had gone up to a certain height. That was the next blip on the radar, and then it wasn't there or something. And then when they did the calculation from the time of it launching or disappearing to where they saw the next blip on the radar, I think I was told, and I might be wrong, but it's certainly in this order, it went at Mach 47. Or 37. It's got a 7 in it, and it's over 10, right? So it's better than what the Russians are claiming to have with our hypersonic missiles and weapons. When he realized that they got super excited about making this into a launch vehicle for ICBMs, he decided to break his other prototype. And this is the kind of thing you do as a passionate 17-year-old. Oh, this really cool thing. Look, it goes, and it's gone. And now, oh, yeah, we can use it for this and this. I don't think I wanted to do that. And I've heard a similar story based on the technology that I've just described to you. So here's the thing. If you have something that per ounce can lift many tons, and you don't have anything on it, right, expect it to disappear. It's there and then it's not. Because in your blink of your eye, it's going to be somewhere else in the atmosphere.
Okay, guys, any last questions? Oh, we got a few more. Okay, let's start over here. Robert.
So, various ways that I've researched that can come up with zero-point energy.
Yeah.
Casimir effect devices, rotating magnetic field, plasma vortex
Yeah.
reactors, scalar and longitudinal technologies, vacuum polarization, quantum optics, dielectric layer resonators like Tesla did. Do you have any impression, intuition, what is most practical, or is it different places these technologies might be more practical, like if you're going to be doing something in space or doing something, in a laboratory or something on a small scale or a larger scale?
Yeah.
Any intuitions on
Well, I mean, when it comes to plasma, I think we've spoken about Ken Shoulders, Brilliant Light Power, ENG8 is a company that I did an interview with. So you're talking about like a miniature sun, then from that perspective, I would say that. Otherwise, microchips, like free energy microchips, like what Sonny White was showing Joe Rogan a few weeks ago, what Garrett Model and Bernard Haish have as well, Casimir cavity patent. It's a free energy microchip, essentially. And that's something that I think practically will change our entire view of energy overall. Yeah.
Yes. And what I can say is that with what I've described to you as a functional technology, claimed by the classified patent and then effectively by Ken Shoulders separately and separately thought about by myself and then confirmed by the person that I met in Europe, this will fail safe. That is to say, when you switch it off, you will get the effect that is caused by, in the Leonid Roitsky, once you deconfine the macro ball lightning, it'll produce lots of small ball lightning and they'll be out of control. When you switch it off, they'll burrow through your confinement and it will disable and fail safe. So when you switch this on, I said this the other day, when you turn it on, you can't turn it off. You just have to keep producing energy. But then you can dial up and down by stimulating it with either sound or electromagnetic waves or pulses in there, either field pulses or direct injection of charged solitons, depending on what you're doing. But there's all kinds of risks there. There's a lot of road to go, but the basis is known. And so, yeah, we know that this will bore through, and if you used fused quartz, it'll bore through the fused quartz. So you need to get it spun up just sufficiently so it's always in the white state, and it's also in the stable state, so that it allows itself to charge the fused quartz so that it then keeps itself confined within that container. If you want to produce more force, you want to produce different kinds of teleportation, you would take that ball and you would produce the gravity wave that comes out the top, you would then rotate that vector to produce a structure that goes into a larger ring. So in my view, these triangular shaped crafts, triangular defines a plane. That's why it's the optimum for a craft that's simple. You don't have, with the individual gravity wave generators, by having them on the three corners, you can actually have a cargo bay which isn't affected by the flux, because there's a flux there, there's a flux there, and it's a flux there. Ounces of material produce tons of force. So you only need to push up there, and push up there, and you've got all the vectors you need to do. Now, if you wanted to teleport, you then rotate that gravitational wave, and as according to John Archibald Wheeler, who was mentioned just now by Ashton, but he said that he invented the term wormhole and black hole, right? When you join those three structures together, it'll then produce a new azimuth. And what's the guy that did Area 51? And he said, yeah. So he says you take the gravitational wave generators and you pinch them to a point, and then you can imagine that it gets so excited over at that point that you are pulled towards that point. And so he describes that. So largely, I think we're very close to being able to understand this out of the black world, essentially.
Does it concern you when you're dealing with plasma? Because plasma has exhibited intelligence, direct movement, shape stability, observer response, EM reaction, adaptive behavior, self-organization, consciousness. It's almost like you might be creating Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Do you worry about lightning? Do you worry about lightning? I mean, is it an existential thing for you? I'm just saying that all lightning starts with ball lightning. Do you worry about when you get a bit of static electricity and you go up to your lover and you go, you're not my lover, by the way, and you go, right? Because you are producing a ball lightning. These things are ubiquitous in nature. In fact, static electricity are dark mode of these things. So if you are paranoid about static electricity, don't go anywhere near this technology. Okay? So it can present consciousness, yes, and I believe that when you get the right device made in the right way, you will not need a control interface other than your mind.
Good question. Let's try to hit a few others. Go ahead.
When we look at new technologies, we often see the marvel of what it can do, but obviously it comes with dangers, just like AI. Many of us use it now daily, but every single major AI developer is warning of the risks. What are the risks, and are we taking precautions with it?
That's a great question. For me, I mean, I look at it through the lens of zero-point energy, of this advanced technology. And in my last interview with Salvatore Pais, he said that, kind of indirectly, that they have their own AI. They're not allowed to use AI when they're on base working military stuff, which kind of implies that maybe they've had something that's more advanced than what we've had publicly that's out there. For me, the big thing about the AI is the singularity. This idea that the AI gets smarter and smarter and smarter, and so it achieves this level of intelligence, as we would think of our knowledge base, that gets bigger and bigger. So what I think will happen is, and I already kind of use AI when I look at some of these papers to interpret them, is that AI is going to be spitting out these answers without people like Bob or I even standing up here. And then the question is, how are people going to react to that when the AI is saying, oh, we can manipulate the permittivity of free space, change the, the refractive index? Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, the biggest risk is the people who want to keep control of people are going to prevent you from allowing it to happen. I worry less about nature than I do about human nature, okay? And so what we need to do is, as I said at the end of my speech, is we need to take ownership of this. We need to take charge of this process, putting it into delivery. Do not hope that someone else will do this for you. There's people in this room, I know Kenneth here, I know there's quite a few people that are very, very capable of doing this research at the fundamental level. You always have to play safe. But when it's rolled out, and this is the purpose of my presentation on Saturday, is to give people the understanding that they know that this is possible. And it explains all of the observations across a broad range of systems, and that we have to do it. Because like what happened to Matsumoto, as I understand it, in 2003, he was pulled in when he was in America and interrogated, and then his lab was raided. This is what I was told. And he basically didn't talk beyond that point much. And so you can make people scared, and there's no real threat there, but you can shut them up for the entire rest of their lives. They choose to self-censorship themselves because they're like, oh, I'm going to lose my whatever it is. You had a question? Right. Yeah.
Okay. There's a few more questions. I think you had your hand up for a while. Good. If you have go ahead.
So the 6 pumps in electrodes, that is, you imagining those going off in phase?
Yes. You could use 2 or 3 phases. Now, it depends whether you're trying to just do it with static plates and do it with electrostatic field outside of the reactor. That's one way to do it, to maintain. Because in his argument, he separates 2 things out. He says you have pure fluidized electrons to do the propulsion, but if you want to produce electricity, you lower that down so that it isn't filling the full volume with fluidized electrons, and you have a slightly lower density, and then you actually have electrodes in there to pick up the extra electricity. So that is basically cohering from the vacuum.
Okay, guys, we only have a couple more minutes. Let's do a couple last questions. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, so cymatics, okay, so very good. So cymatics speaks into this system where if you can imagine a plate with your sand on it and you have your sound waves, it produces these patterns. The patterns are presented by where the wave conjugation cancels, so you've got a node, so the sand piles up there. This is what I'm saying about that concept of teleportation. When you make a macro electron and you embody something inside that electron, so it's caught within its overall non-radiating boundary, and its overall wave function expresses no charge and it expresses no inertia, the overall structure, the exotic vacuum object, this like macro electron or macro atom, you might think of it, but it's actually like a macro electron. Then when that's moving, it can only move to the next node based on its resonant wave function. And so that's like sand presenting on the nodes in a thing. So like, I want to move in that direction, and I can only present at the next node on my wave function. I can only be the collapse wave function here or the collapse wave function over there.
Yeah, I would add on to that too. From the cymatics perspective, I look at it from the perspective of Bose-Einstein condensate, where they're actually like trying to manipulate matter 3-dimensionally with a wave function. And I think what they're trying to do is figure out how that matter, if you look at it from like a mirror, like how what we see on our side impacts the flip side, which might be over here somewhere else that could be like entangled to that position. So it takes our 3-dimensional plus 4D space-time, adds that extra dimension to it, using frequency and vibration to interact with that medium. Yeah.
Actually, the way I see entanglement, I'm just going to riff here, right? My ring for my wedding ring was made from one gold nugget. The reason I chose that is because I think that, like out of Matsumoto's lead ball here, all of those carbon atoms were the same wave function, and they were born instantaneously, which means they are the same atom, and they're all entangled, right? So the reason I chose a single gold nugget to forge 2 rings was I believe they were born out of the same kind of exotic vacuum object structure, not born on some supernova event in a distant galaxy. No, it was born on Earth in part of an energetic process. Maybe that was a lightning bolt, maybe it was some whatever. And so those are the same atoms. Now, if I take that gold ring and that gold nugget and I make 2 rings, I believe that me and my wife have a quantumly entangled object wherever we are.
That's very, that's okay. We'll do one last question, then we're gonna stop. Go ahead. Yeah. So how did we get together? That's a good thing to end it on. So I found out about Bob Greenyer because he made a video back in November of 2023. I think it was Bernie or somebody reached out to you.
No, it was a former director of the project. He
said,
yeah, okay.
Have
you seen these videos? There's something like what you're talking about. And
yeah.
I just looked at the videos. I have to do a video on this.
Yeah, that's what he said.
And I found out you were talking about them.
Yeah, he was reviewing the videos, and he was like looking at the ball lightning structure, the monopole potential structure. I mean, Bob was basically looking inside the orbs and seeing what was happening there. And I could tell he had inside information from just watching his videos. And that's how we got together. And, since then, I guess it's been, a love story in the making. Okay, guys, thank you very much for following today. You can come interact with us. We'll be hanging out this afternoon, so come hang out, talk, what have you. But thank you guys very much for supporting.
What is the time? Has anyone got the time?
Yeah, it's 1 o'clock.
Okay, so is it eat time? Yeah. Okay, we're going to go and eat, and then I'm going to have all these props and stuff so you can come and handle them. I'll bring some to the table in a minute, so in the other room. Is there actually food provided today?
For speakers.
Okay, all right, yeah. All right, so come and hang out.
Is there another thing here?
What? There is another thing, but we can even go in one of the rooms.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I've got the other plans to go. This one. And I've never done this before, but if I'm in a screwdriver, I want to power this with this control system. That'll be the first time I practice geometry. That is the whole point. Oh, this makes it toy. Yeah, but I want to use this drive system. I've never done it before. See what happens. Let's see if it produces a torque. Yeah, so let's go in here.